Y'all, my name is Miko with Behavior Analyst Supervisor, and we are so happy to be expanding our YouTube channel. We're going to be uploading a lot of really awesome free resources here for you. This first resource that we want to upload is our question dissection course. We call it Break Down the Beast. During this 4-hour course, we go through how to dissect questions. We're going to work through it with you, we're going to provide you answers, and we're going to provide you explanations on not only why the correct answer is correct, but also why the other answers are incorrect. This is something that we hope each of you learn how to do. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us, send us an email, we're happy to help. We host these courses twice a month. If you're interested in accessing one in the future, feel free to check out our website, behavioranalystsupervisor.com. We have a lot of really awesome resources on there, including an all-you-need guaranteed package that is money-back guaranteed to help you pass your test, or we'll give you your money back, like I said. Anyways, let's go ahead and jump right into our question dissection.
I'm Kevin, by the way. That's Amy.
Hi.
So if you don't know us, here we are to break down at least 45 questions and any other things that come up. So we kind of want to dive deep. And for those of you who don't know us, the main idea is that definitions aren't enough, that, SAF meds isn't enough. You have to know how to apply these concepts. So that's what we're going to do a lot today, is talk about how you break these things down and envision, picture, what would it look like? And I'll practice that with you. I'll model it for you, right? So here we go. Without further ado, we're jumping in. Which scenario below most likely fits the displayed data? And I hope you can see that. It's kind of a small chart, but the idea is still valid if you can you don't have to get too detailed in there. Anyway, here are the options. Low rates of responding, followed by low frequency, followed by high frequency. High rates of behavior, followed by low rates of behavior, followed by high rates of behavior. C, low rates of responding, followed rapid responding, followed by reinforcer satiation. And finally, rapid rates of responding, followed by stability, followed by low rates of responding. Kind of just a graph about what's that chart generally saying.
And for those of you who joined a little late, you can just send your answers privately to me, Amy Cambu, and then when I have the majority of them in, I'll let Kevin know.
Or just ignore what anyone else says, right?
Yes, Kevin wants to work on your reactivity.
That's you. You could be the one person that gets it right, and everybody else is wrong. How's everybody thinking about this one?
Give him 1 second.
Okay. It's an interesting one to start off with.
I'm sorry, I was late to get in probably, and I missed the instructions. How can I send the answers, please?
Oh, in the chat, you can send them to Amy Cambu.
Okay.
So it's right down on the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. There's a little icon like a text bubble that says chat. And then there's a drop down of who you send it to.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah,
Sure.
I'm glad
So-
you said that. I was like, I don't think I can see the controls. I can't
Kevin.
tell her how to get there.
We have a lot of A's, some C's, and some D's. Nobody likes B. B is lonely today.
Oh, poor B. Well, we'll get some B's in here. So this is a little bit confusing, but in general, this is my way of looking at a chart. Just wanted you to kind of understand what's going on with it. So if you looked at it and you didn't even see the answers, or you're not looking at them yet, I'd say, well, it starts off fairly slow, and then the rate of behavior with this cumulative graph increases. So right between 30 and 40, there's this steep increase in the rate, and then it levels off again. So that's basically what we're looking at here with the answers. It's kind of chunking it into 3 parts, where low rates in the beginning, yeah, pretty much. They're lower rates in the beginning anyway. then they're higher rates, and then they're lower rates. And that isn't exactly an answer. So we have to find the one that's right. Are there A, low rates of responding? Yep, followed by low frequency? No, not really. This is the part where A isn't right. B, apparently nobody liked B anyway, but high rates of behavior? No, not at the beginning. That's not really where the highest rates of behaviors are. So I agree with you, B's not good. How about C? Low rates of responding, okay, good. Followed by rapid responding, yes, okay. Followed by reinforcer satiation. Okay, well, this is a bit of an assumption, but that could explain why these rates here or at the end are lower. So yeah, that could be the answer. Not sure that reinforcer satiation is what happened, but it does fit the data. How about D? Rapid rates of responding. Okay, no, that's just like B, where it starts out with the wrong answer. So we can just say that isn't it. So it's C. That's the only answer that actually fits the data. Even if we're not told anything more about this, that must be the answer. So that's kind of where I'm going with that one. If it's not A, B, or D, it's C. And C does fit the data. Does that work for everybody? Go ahead and chat questions if you do have them, but that's what I want to do. And we'll just keep moving through these. I'm going to try to get all of our brains working this morning.
I had a question on the last chart.
Okay.
Just visually looking at it, is this a cumulative graph?
It is.
Okay.
Okay. Yep. And when I say rates, I'm like, okay, it's a cumulative graph, so it's frequency graph, right? But when it gets steeper, we can say, yep, it's a higher rate.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet. Okay. Here we go.
I think just before you go on to the next one, which you already
Sorry.
did. So
I
can
keep trying, but
I know. Can you talk for just a moment about what's going to happen if they see a flat line there?
Oh, sure. Okay, so I got things to move in front of me. So I do want, this is a great point. So if there was a flat line between 60 and 70, then all that's saying is that no frequency was recorded between there, right? So if there's a dot here at 70, then what I'm saying is from 60 to 70, nothing happened. That's it, or no more frequency of that behavior. That's what a flat line means.
I guess in my notes, I would put it as flat line on a cumulative graph means no responding.
Mm-hmm. And it means at this point. So if these were sessions, let's say this is session 6 and then session 7, I'd want you to recognize that in session 6, yeah, something did happen. They recorded some more behavior than session 5. But if there are no more frequency of behaviors in session 7, well, then in session 7 that nothing happened. Okay, so it's not, oh, it's the start of the flat line. It's at the right side of the flat line. Okay. Yeah, these are good questions.
And one more, sorry.
That's fine.
Somebody wants you to
We
go
got
in
time.
a little bit more detail about the reinforcer satiation part.
Oh, I just mean that, imagine that you use a reinforcer like edibles to, reinforce, let's say, trials that you're running with a kid. Well, eventually, or maybe you see a graph like this. They start off slow, and then, oh, they get the idea. They're getting, an M&M or something, and they have high rates of responding. But eventually, you get tired of it, right? They're getting satiated with M&Ms, and they don't really want to work so hard to get M&Ms anymore. So you might actually see this just flatten off. So that's what I mean by reinforcer satiation. If that's happening, then likely you're going to get lower rates of responding.
Okay, you can move on.
Okay, are you sure?
Yep.
All right, here we go. Amaya, a 2-year-old, has successfully stopped sucking her thumb with use of a DRI/extinction plan. She hasn't sucked her thumb in 6 months. One day while at the park, a very aggressive dog was barking at her, and she was on top of the play structure. Her mom didn't hear Amaya calling. When she was finally saved from the dog by another mother, Amaya was sucking her thumb. Amaya experienced what? A, extinction-induced aggression or emotional response. B, resurgence. C, response induction. Or D, resistance to extinction. You all thinking.
I know they're quick on the draw with this one.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of people like B, like 90%.
90%.
But we do have some
percentage.
A's and C's mentioned.
If you can get a 90% on the test, you're doing great. Well, all right, I agree with almost all of you, 90% of you. It is B. But let's look at why. So I think it's B, and hopefully you do too, because resurgence describes, and I'd love for you to do this. I encourage you to kind of put it in your own words, or make it a simple thing so you can recognize it in these scenarios. You say, well, let's see, resurgence is some behavior was reinforced before, then it went under extinction, and now a new behavior was put in place, whatever that was, but then that previous behavior resurges, it comes back in a new situation. So if you can kind of just think of it like that, then it does look like resurgence here in this scenario, and indeed that's what it is. So she stopped sucking her thumb for 6 months, and then this situation came about in which whatever she used instead of sucking her thumb before stopped working too. So she started sucking her thumb.
Kevin?
Resurgence. Yeah.
A good answer could be also spontaneous recovery.
Yes, I think so. I think that the resurgence is a little more specific, but we could say spontaneous recovery, because usually spontaneous recovery, we're talking about a behavior that was extinguished, and then we don't really talk about some other new behavior has taken over. We're just saying that original behavior was extinguished, but comes back. So yeah, I think this is a little more specifically resurgence, but yes, I think it's the same concept, that it's returning after it's been extinguished. Yeah, excellent. So let's, as I like to do, we have to know why these other ones aren't right. So if we're 90% sure that it's B, let's all make sure it's 100% that we get there, because we go A, extinction-induced aggression. So all we see really is Amaya's behavior, and it doesn't look like she had aggression. But do you say, well, is this an emotional response? Maybe it was an emotional response, and that's why she was sucking her thumb. Yeah, but it's not extinction induced. That it wasn't that her behavior was being reinforced, and then all of a sudden it was extinguished, or she experienced extinction, and because of that extinction had this emotional response. It's more about the behavior that was there before came back. So that's why B is a better answer than A. Response induction is really response generalization, so that just doesn't fit. And if you didn't know that, then hopefully you do now. You're like, well, that doesn't fit the question. And resistance to extinction, again, it doesn't fit quite. We're talking about extinction, but it's not that we're having trouble extinguishing her behavior. In fact, it looks like it was. The thumb sucking went away for 6 months. So it leaves us to get even more confident that it's B, because it's not really A, and it's definitely not C, and it's not D either, right?
Looks like we're okay.
Okay, I'm hesitant to move on.
You
There we
can,
go.
sorry.
Let's try it. You're teaching your daughter to hit a softball. You tell her to keep her elbow up, and then you raise her elbow to the correct position. Each subsequent swing, you add less pressure to her elbow, and finally, you remove your hand altogether. This procedure is called what? Is it a physical prompt? Is it graduated guidance? Is it least to most prompting? Or is it a stimulus prompt?
Very nice, everyone. So the majority of people said B.
Okay, all right. It's kind of funny to me, you know, there's scenarios, but then it's about the answers. So sometimes a really difficult scenario can be easy because the answers are easy, or there's an obvious one. And this one seems okay. It's not too hard. So a physical prompt, you might have said, yeah, it is. And you're right. There's some physical prompting going on here. But sounds like most of you decided that B is a better answer. And you're right. So that's what we're always looking for, is the best answer. Yes, physical prompts are in here, but this describes physical prompts and fading of those physical prompts, which is graduated guidance. That's it. Okay. So we know it's B kind of already, even just going through these, but I always want you to just check and see if for some reason there is a better answer. So you don't have to take a long time like I'm going to, but just make sure you've got the right answer. So least to most prompting. If it were least to most prompting, what would that look like? That's where I'm going with that question. I want you to be able to picture that. If it's least to most prompting, then I would basically be hands off and see how she does. And if I need to make corrections, then I would come in with more prompts, more invasive prompts. And that's not what it says. In fact, I'm fading. So it's not C. And it's not a stimulus prompt because I'm actually doing a response prompt. And if I can go over this again, remember, response prompts are me talking. So there's a verbal, which means talking or writing or whatever, some communication. There's a model and there's physical prompts. Those are the response prompts. That's it. So there's verbal, modeling, and physical. And if it's one of those, it's a response prompt. If it's not, it's a stimulus prompt or something else. So it's not D. And if there are no more questions, let's move on. Great. You guys are killing it already.
I know this group so far is doing a really good job of having some clear answers. I really appreciate those of you who explain your answer when you're chatting it to me. That just is going to help you do better on the test because you really are understanding the concepts.
Yeah. Well, I can tell I love these DRs. So let's see if maybe I can confuse a few more people.
Great. That's what we all need on
it's
Saturday
really our
morning.
goal here at BAS is to confuse you and then spit you out feeling like you figured it out. All right, one mischievous little brother can get a big reaction from the older brother when he stares at him while riding in the backseat of a car. Tired of the fighting, their mother tells the boys that if together they can look out of the window and name 100 objects that they see, she'll get each a milkshake. The mother is using DRA, DRT, DRO, or DRL, or none of the above.
And some of you just joined. This is question number 4.
I'm glad you know. I don't know, 4 or 5. Are you shushing me? She's shushing.
People overwhelmingly like question A. I mean, answer A.
Yeah, I knew what you meant.
You did.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess I can't fool you, but let's look at them. All right, so A, if you're doing a DRA, again, picture, well, how do I know it's a DRA? Well, what would that look like? Something like that. Then you can imagine, well, I'm going to, instead of fighting, I want you to do something else. And there it is. I'm going to reinforce that. If you can do this thing, name 100 objects, then you get a milkshake. It doesn't preclude fighting also, but hopefully while you're naming objects, at least, you aren't doing the fighting. That's the idea. So it's not a DRI necessarily, but it is DRA, it looks like. Well, let's make sure it's not a DRD. Well, yeah, you want to reduce this behavior, it seems, but I don't see any attempt to make steps down from where the behavior stands at the moment to a lower duration or a lower rate or something like that. So I don't see that. DRO would be basically, it's very close to this, so I thought maybe I grabbed something here, but apparently not. So if it were C, then we'd say just stop fighting until we get home, or stop fighting until we get to town, or something like that. And then I'll give you a milkshake. So don't fight for this period of time, then I'll reinforce you. That would be a DRO. And it's not quite that. She's not saying don't fight. She's saying do something else. So it's not DRO. And I talked with someone yesterday, actually, so I want to make this point, that certainly you could do a DRA, mother could do this, and a DRO at the same time. I want you to name 100 objects instead of fighting, and I also want you to not fight for 10 minutes. You could do both of these at the same time. In fact, you can do many different combination of things at the same time. Anyway, moving on. DRL suffers same kind of idea from DRD. Doesn't talk about an interval that we're going to stretch. It doesn't talk about lowering the rate to an acceptable amount of fighting. That's what DRL would do, and it doesn't. So DRA is the answer.
All righty.
Sounds like you already got that.
Yeah, most people really like that one, so moving on.
Great. And even though you guys seemed like you're killing it, and that's perfect, I want that. I mean, first I want you to be a little confused, and so I can, earn my money, right? But I do want you to picture these, not just the answer that you have, but these other ones. Just make sure you understand, even for the ones that you're getting right.
So it goes back to what I've talked to many of you about in the initial meeting is, what would it look like? So really think about these things and try on each of these answers in a scenario.
Okay, moving on. George was eating too many peanut butter cups and wanted to eat less. His friend, yeah, it's not George, it's Kevin. But anyway, his friend began coming to him about 5 times per day and offering George a peanut butter cup. For the first 2 days, George ate more than he used to, but ate far fewer at the end of a week than he used to. This procedure is best described as what? Is it NCR to create an abolishing operation? Is it satiation training? Is it exposure therapy? Or is it NCR to create an establishing operation?
Lots of A's and a smattering of B's. Oh, and a D.
Oh, and a D. That's exciting. Okay, so let's go over them. Again, just going top to bottom. You can go top to bottom, bottom to top, whatever, but I like it if you can be organized. I've talked to some of you, especially when you get nervous or you're not sure, sometimes you jump around. And I would really encourage you to go through each and give it some kind of rating scale, 1 to 10. I'm going to advocate for yes, no, or maybe. Where you say, yeah, that's a good answer. Maybe, or I don't know, or no. And if you can kind of label it that way and be organized with that, then you're eliminating those no's and you're getting down to, better and better chance of getting that right. Anyway, NCR to create an abolishing operation. Yeah, it sounds like that. So if I'm doing NCR to create an abolishing operation, that's really what NCR does, so if you didn't know that, that's really a good thing to file away. So that's a reason why NCR works, is we offer a reinforcer every so often or on a fixed interval, whatever. It's just a time period. You don't have to do anything for it. So you're just given it. And if you're given it, then you want it less. It's basically the idea. So that looks like that's what happened here. Is his friend just gave him about 5 times a day. So you could see that as, you know, you can figure out how many hours they had in a day and divide it by 5. So we can figure out what that fixed time interval was. But George didn't need to do anything to get the peanut butter cups. Just his friend gave them to him. And it looks like it had that effect. That he didn't want them after a while. So it is A, I think. But let's look at this. Satiation training. Yeah, that sounds great if that was a thing, and maybe it is, but I think A is a more specific answer. And I've never heard of satiation training, although probably somebody has made that term up or used it. Sounds good, but I don't think it's it. Exposure therapy, probably you didn't get caught by that one, but that's not it. D, NCR to create an establishing operation. Well, that one, if you chose it, fine. It does look like NCR, but NCR doesn't create an establishing operation. So given something, it doesn't generally make you want it more. It's, you get tired of it. You get satiated from it. And that's the reason we use NCR. Which, okay, so if I'm going to talk about this, if you're going to use NCR, you probably shouldn't offer something that is a generalized conditioned reinforcer. Why? Well, because those things don't satiate very well. And that's why using them in NCR probably wouldn't work so well. So if I just started giving you money for no reason, you probably won't get tired of me giving you money. You're not going to stop behaving to get money. I don't know what behavior I'd be trying to reduce with you there, but that wouldn't be a very good intervention. I mean, you'd like it, but okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I should say the answer is A. Are we ready to move on?
Yes, you can move on.
All right. Whenever you drive in Chicago, you stop at stop signs 8 out of 10 times. Seems like a pretty low average, but anyway, when you drive in Nairobi, stop signs don't seem to be important to anyone. So you stop at stop signs about 2 out of 10 times. One day in Chicago, you get a ticket for running a stop sign. This event would most likely result in what? Would it be the matching law? Would it result in behavioral contrast, result in cultural differences, or result in indiscriminable contingencies?
Ooh, this one's going to be fun. So far, we have a 50-50 split. I like it when it's like that. The two best.
50-50.
Yeah.
I bet I know the two.
I bet you do as well.
I gotta do something on that.
B's and D's, Kevin. B's and D's.
Oh, no, I thought maybe A's and B's.
Oh, no.
But okay, all right, B's and D's. I could be wrong. So this event, we've got stop signs, and you stop or you don't in Chicago versus Nairobi. So it sounds like different settings, right? Your behavior is different. There's some schedule of reinforcement for you in one place that's different than the other. And then something happens that may change the schedule in one of those settings. Chicago, for instance, where you get a ticket. And now you're likely to stop more in Chicago. So if you stop more in Chicago than you used to, you'll probably stop less in Nairobi than you used to. That's what I want you to see is we've got two schedules. That is, you know, they're happening at different times or in different places. Then there's a change to one of them. We would expect that the change would go in the opposite direction in the other setting or at the other time. That is behavioral contrast. So it is B, But let's see, I guess you guys weren't fooled by the matching law, which is wonderful. If you're talking about the matching law, you should see at least two, I guess, but two schedules of reinforcement that are interval schedules. Got to have two interval schedules for the matching law to really apply. We can talk about that with some other questions in the future, but I don't see that. So that's good enough to say it's not the matching law. It is behavior contrast, like we said, but cultural differences. Yeah, it is cultural differences, but clearly that it doesn't, which would most likely result in cultural differences. No, it is cultural differences, so there are some. Anyway, D, indiscriminable contingencies. So does running a stop sign or all of this setup likely result in indiscriminable contingencies? I'm going to say no. So if you said yes, fine, we can chit chat and we can argue by email. But what I'm going to say is, sure, there seem to be some indiscriminable contingencies. You don't know when you're going to, when your stop at a stop sign is going to be reinforced or punished, in this case, like running the stop sign. But this whole scenario doesn't result in an indiscriminable contingency. It maybe describes a little bit of the contingency, but the main idea here, the main idea of this whole scenario is setting up that there are two different settings or two different schedules in place that are not concurrent. They're successive. There's one and then the other. And then one changes. And we would predict that the other would change in the opposite direction. So the whole thing is about behavior contrast. So that's fine if you said D, because yeah, that's kind of true. It sort of describes one, but the whole scenario is really about something. So this one might be, or my advice to you would be about the theme. There's a theme to all of these longer scenarios. They're telling you these things for a reason. They're leading you in a direction. And go back to that. If you're caught between B and D, well, which one really describes all the stuff that they're giving me? It's more B than it is D. Yeah. Okay.
I think we're
I
clear
look
on that.
over here because usually she has some fingers up.
This is a group
people
that
have
isn't
questions.
asking a lot of questions, so
Okay.
they
all right.
must be understanding it.
Well, maybe after you get some more coffee after the break or whatever. Maybe it's not that early where you are, but okay, here we go. All are advantages of token economies, except A, that it is more convenient to provide a token for reinforcement rather than a backup reinforcer. B, that they can be used with individuals or groups. C, that they foster the self as a reinforcing agent. Or D, that they can connect the desired behavior to a backup reinforcer.
This group is very fast.
And I've got a lot of passers in the group, huh?
Mostly C's, a couple of A's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that what you expected me to say?
I guess I did.
Okay,
Yeah.
well,
Okay, so I think maybe we're talking to some of you overthinkers, and most of you maybe are raising your hand or thinking, yeah, that's me. So if you're an overthinker, I think maybe A would draw you in more than it should. And this is a good one to talk about, the overthinking. If you can stare at a question long enough, you can kind of make any answer fit, right? That's your talent as an overthinker. Well, let's not use your talent for this test. And I'm going to give you one of the recommendations, but first, let me go over the answer. A, that is more convenient to provide a token for reinforcement rather than a backup reinforcement. Yeah, I think that's generally true. Like it's easier to just give you a token right when you do the behavior rather than, that backup reinforcer, whatever that might be. That even if I didn't give you a token, you'd have to wait for it. So it's more convenient, more efficient, more immediate, those kinds of things. It's not a bad answer. And we're looking for the bad answer, right? So all our advantages of token economies, sure, that's a pretty decent one. B, that they can be used with individuals or groups, sure, yeah, they can be, and that's an advantage. And D, I'm going to skip C, that they can connect the desired behavior to a backup reinforcement. Yeah, that's clearly what a token economy does. So A, B, and D are right. And if I read C, they foster the self as a reinforcing agent. No, because they're socially mediated. You get tokens from someone else. So that isn't really an advantage of a token economy. Yeah?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. So what I was going to say with, if you consider yourself to be an overthinker, or at least you do that sometimes, and you thought A might be one you could talk yourself into, here's what I would like you to try anyway, is when you're taking a mock exam, read through the scenario or the question, then read through these answers, considering, yeah, I think that one, yeah, okay, maybe, you know, whatever. And when you get down to D, hit your stopwatch mentally or actually, and give yourself about 20 seconds to make a decision. If you're making, if you're taking longer than that, then you're probably starting to, you know, spin your wheels and overthink things and try to make, oh, well, maybe it's that answer, or maybe this one. So you kind of, you know, talk yourself into too many things. And so 20 seconds is actually a long time after you have gone through everything, you know, once. That's what I want you to do if you're doing that, okay? Anyway, back to the exception, the bad answer, which is the right answer, is C.
Thank you for repeating that.
Thank you for reinforcing me. Okay, a parent has told you when the behavior is occurring and when it's not. You also understand how the behavior might be maintained. What you are unclear about is the topography of the behavior, and you've only heard of it being described over the phone with the parent. What is the best next step or next best step? A, read journal articles related to the described behavior. B, ask colleagues about similar behavior. C, define the behavior better by providing surveys to the parent. Or D, briefly observe the behavior.
This group is kind of on fire.
Yeah.
This is going to be a good recording to have because you guys are killing it. Almost everyone likes D, Kevin.
Okay, I gotta try harder. I mean, I thought you were gonna tell me this is softball. I think this one's easy, but you guys are killing it. So hopefully we get into some harder questions. But yes.
And I'm sorry, this one makes such an important point. Like Kevin and I were talking about just this the other day in terms of schools, and people need to observe. It's really hard to create an intervention when you haven't observed the behavior, maybe even unethical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Funny
yeah.
that.
Okay, you're right. It's relevant to talk about that because, yeah, this was just a story, but it certainly happens where people give advice about, oh, okay, so if this has happened, we'll just do this or whatever without actually observing the behavior. They're just getting a report. And that's, I agree, it's unethical.
So you guys cued into that really quickly. Didn't let those other ones distract you. Nice.
Yeah. So D is it. You got to briefly observe the behavior. So reading journal articles, clearly that doesn't answer the question very well. It's sure I could do that, but that's not the next best step. That just doesn't tell me about this particular behavior. It tells me, you know, in general, what you can do, but I haven't seen this particular behavior, this individual's behavior. Ask colleagues, obviously. If you haven't seen the behavior, you're describing what somebody else has described. And C, define the behavior better. Sure, you can do that, but it's probably better for you to go look at it rather than just get more information indirectly. Direct observation is important. So the answer is D. Yes.
I think people are happy with that.
Okay, here we go. So I know this looks kind of tiny. You don't need to know all the details of it, so don't get too, into it here, you overthinkers especially. But which chart would you use to determine if an intervention were effective or not? And I do want you to know about these charts. This is the same data, just charted 4 different ways. So which one would you use to determine if an intervention were effective or not?
So this one had a lot of A's, C's, and D's. Again, no one likes B.
Okay. So let's pretend that we are looking at the rate of a behavior and over obviously over time, but over sessions or something. So each one of these dots would be, session 1, session 2, session 3, session 4, session 5, etc. Okay. So if we do that, let's start with A, that we can see that whatever this behavior is started here, went down for a second, went up. So it's generally increased from wherever it began. And if I look the same at B, which is really just the same chart, if you just plot a little point at the top of each of these bars, you're just connecting those dots, right? So it looks like that. But when I use a bar graph, it kind of makes it look like I want to compare one session to another session. And this, you could see that, okay, the behavior went up compared to these first 2. I guess you could conclude that. But this line graph seems a little more clear, and maybe this is a bias, but the reason we use bar graphs is really more to contrast. Like I said, between this and this and this, you're saying these are separate things and I'm going to compare them. Whereas this is like a progression over time. So this C is the same line graph here, but we just didn't connect the dots. So I think that makes it a little less easy to read. I think we use line graphs for that reason. And then D is really all this information on a frequency graph. So you can tell that, yes, the frequency goes up, and it seems like a fairly consistent rate of increase. But that's it. It doesn't really tease out. You can tell that the behavior frequency increased and, guess at the rate, but it doesn't tell you as much information as A. So, like I said, you could say A, B, or C. I think you could argue any one of those, but generally we use line graphs, and I think you know that. So that's the easiest one for us to use.
Somebody's asking a question that I was going to ask. What's the little line after the graphs in A, B, and D?
That is Excel. So when you do the chart in Excel, and maybe I just didn't know Excel well enough to take that out, but it's supposed to be like a little legend or something.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Okay.
We're old.
Good question. Hey, speak for yourself.
You're older than I
am. Only a little. All right, so the answer here is A. I mean, I look way older, I know that. A free operant naturalistic observation that is conducted in order to determine potential reinforcers typically uses A, either duration or frequency-based measurements, B, establishing operations and paired choice, C, indirect assessments and direct assessments, or D, multiple schedules.
Mostly A's, a few B's.
Okay. I was kind of hoping for a few of mixed up answers here. All right, let's look at this. So in order to determine potential reinforcers, you think in preference assessments, but the first part, a free operant naturalistic observation. Okay, so let's talk about that specifically. A, either duration or frequency-based measurements. Yeah, we do that with a free operant observation. How long, let's say there's 10 different things to play with in a room, and I bring a child in and I just see how long do they engage with each item, or how many times do they engage with each item, or both. You could do both. Anyway, that sounds right, but let's look at, so if I'm doing the yes, no, maybe thing here, for A, I'd say, yes, that's a good idea. That seems right. Let me look at B though. Establishing operations in paired choice. Certainly, it would be great to foster an establishing operation for the things that you want to present in a preference assessment. You want to have kids or whoever want these items or activities more. So that makes sense. And using paired choice makes sense. It just this paired choice ruins the idea that it's a free operant observation. So that's the part where I wanted you to see that can't be the answer. Paired choice isn't free operant. You're only presenting those two items at a time. You're not just allowing the client to look at all kinds of reinforcing activities or items. So it's not B just for that reason. So I would say A was a yes, B was a no, C, indirect assessments and direct measurements. Okay, it's very vague, not specific. What do you mean direct measurements? What do you mean indirect assessments? So at least I'd be like, maybe, but it's certainly not better than A. So I would just give it a no. And then multiple schedules. Yeah, we can use multiple schedules for preference assessments. I think the best example is like single stimulus assessments. You're really just presenting one thing at a time. But I don't think that's the answer here. We're talking about free operant observation, which is concurrent schedule. So it doesn't sound like D is right. But anyway, I think A is the best answer, and there's not a better one. So I'm going to stick with A, and I hope you do too.
So we've talked to some of you about the idea of yes, no, maybe. So as you're going through your answers, you're going, nope, this one is for sure a no. Well, I'm going to keep it on the table. This is a possibility, or yes. And really kind of think about that as you're going through these. And, I know a lot of you are kind of keeping track of your answers. You can even jot that down and see how that plays out when Kevin explains them. Mm-hmm. For now, though, Kevin, can you please go back one slide?
Yeah. No.
And just talk about why it's not D. And are you sure that is 397?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Why is it not D? Yeah, okay. Because this is a frequency graph. Again, it is the same data, so I'm just plotting it on a frequency graph here instead of a bar or line or just another ray without connecting the dots. Anyway, answer D isn't the answer to me, because if I want to know whether an intervention is effective, all I can see here is that it went up, which happens to be the right conclusion. But if I do this on a frequency graph, it will always go up. So it's not a great way to see whether an intervention was effective. Even if I decided that I wanted to increase a skill, then sure, I could plot it on here, but it's not really going to tell me whether the intervention was effective. It's going to tell me, how many behaviors were omitted. I need to set some criterion if I wanted to say, the goal is to have this kid learn 100 sight words or something. Then I would be deciding based on, the criterion rather than the chart. So this chart, the D, doesn't really give me information about each session, or really it only gives me frequency and some idea of the rate. So that's why I just don't think it gives me enough information. to tell me whether an intervention was effective or not.
Okay, so
Okay,
you
answer.
now can move forward to 399.
Another answer. Okay, ooh, it's a long one.
And everybody, you've heard our spiel. When you get one of these on your test, take a deep breath to reset. And you might want to start with the last sentence, because then you can kind of go through that longer scenario, pulling out what's relevant based on the question.
Let's try it. Given what you know from this scenario, what might be a likely intervention based on an attention function? Oh, that's great. It's nice and specific. So you know what you're looking for. Likely intervention with knowing that attention is the function. Great. Now we can read it. Junior, a third grader, annoys his classmates by pinching them. This really only happens during independent work time and at a rate of 4 times per hour. His teachers note that he also tends to blurt out a lot during whole group time if he isn't called on regularly. As the school's behavior support specialist, you want to create an intervention to decrease this behavior. And now, going back to this, given what you know, what might be a good intervention or likely intervention based on an attention function? A, train Junior to get his peers' attention by tapping them on the shoulder. B, DRO with a fixed interval of 14. C, NCR access to free time. D, telling Junior that pinching hurts his friends and that there are other ways to get them to like him.
You missed it. I was giving you all of the answers in sign language as they were coming in.
Oh, I did miss it.
You
Why didn't you
did.
sign louder?
A's, B's, and C's, Kevin. A's, B's, and C's.
Okay, so I guess we introduced some confusion just by making it longer, right? These are overwhelming, and I agree with Amy. You gotta like psych yourself up or get ready to read it. Because here's what happens a lot of times with these longer ones, you end up reading it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, and you're wasting time. And I think I'm saying this with evidence, you're just avoiding. So we need you to kind of bring yourself together, focus enough to pull out all the information, and reading that last sentence first helps. But if you're reading it multiple times, you're just not paying attention each time. And that's not helping you.
And that's, you know, I've met with some of you who have the $4.99 package. That's one of the things that I kind of have modeled for you, is that idea to be able to read it once, but take out what's relevant out of every sentence. Mm-hmm. And, you know, even jot that down, because then you don't have to keep going back to it and reading it and not getting it. Pull what you need.
Yeah. Okay. Let's practice that right now. So if I read this again, and let's say it was for the first time, and I said, okay, annoys his classmates by pinching them. I might write pinching. This really only happens during independent work time at a rate of 4 times per hour, right? I write 4 times per hour and independent work time. His teachers note that he also tends to blur it out a lot during whole group time if he isn't called on regularly. Okay, so I might write attention function or keep that idea in mind. As the school's behavior support specialist, you want to create an intervention. Okay, well, this is the goal. I want an intervention to decrease. And then it even says what it is I want and that there's an attention function. So now I've kind of got like, okay, pinching, reduce, knowing that it's an attention function. What's a good intervention for this? That's where I am, right? So then let's get into these. A, train him to get his peers' attention by tapping them on the shoulder. So regardless of whether you see this as a DRA or not, I want you to pretend, you know, I said, what would that look like? And so did Amy. I love that question. But this is a slightly different question or application, is to say, what would that do? What if I did this? Then would that solve the problem? And that's what I want you to do with this one, is if I did this, would it fit what they want? Would it be an intervention based on an attention function that seems, likely to work? Yeah, I think so. So instead of getting attention by pinching, you can tap them on the shoulder. That makes sense to me. So I'd say it's a yes or at least a maybe if I'm doing yes, no, maybe, right? With B, a DRO of FI 14 means that every 14 minutes that there is not pinching, Junior doesn't pinch anyone, he can get some reinforcement. We don't know what that is, but we assume attention would be the right thing. So maybe I could even add that. I don't want you to add too much, but DRO FI 14 and give him praise or talk to him or something, give him a hug. But this is saying don't do it, rather than we know it's an attention function. So you could do DRO and provide attention, but it's not giving me that. And why not do a DRA that teaches him what he should do? Maybe in addition to the DRO, like I said, but it seems like A is a better answer at this point. So would DRO work? Perhaps, but it seems not as good as DRA because it's saying just don't pinch. How about C, NCR access to free time? So if I get access to free time, how does that help my attention function? It doesn't. So I'm not addressing the function they told me. So if you chose C, NCR might not be a bad answer. You can give this junior attention, but access to free time isn't really addressing the right thing. So if it said access to attention, NCR attention every 5 minutes or something, that might be a good answer. And then we'd have to argue about whether A or C are better. But there really has to be one best answer. And so C fails because of that. How about D? Telling Junior that pinching hurts his friends, and I love that. I put that in because you probably all have heard, or maybe you've said something like that. Oh no, that hurts our friends. Well, yeah, okay, you want to say these things because maybe you got rule-governed behavior, but clearly that is not an intervention for changing behavior. It hurts our friends and that there are other ways to get them to like it. Yeah, like what? So let's teach him some specific ways to get attention instead of pinching. Let's have the contingency work to change behaviors rather than just tell them you shouldn't do that. Okay. All right, here we go.
Okay, so 1 second, can you go back?
Yeah.
So one of the things that was brought up with this one is the idea of it might be inappropriate to have him do this during independent work time, to tap them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's valid. So how do you know that, or why would you say, I mean, are we saying that we're not sure that this would be a good time to do A, so let's do B? Is that kind of where that's?
No, I think just more that it might not be appropriate.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I have to agree with you and realize that you are adding some information here. You're saying, well, we couldn't do that, or it might not be the best time. Okay, so if you really think that, then we have to make sure that that makes A, I'm going to say that would rule out A and it would rule in B. And I don't think that we have enough information to say, let's get rid of A because, and make B a better answer. I agree with you, like maybe it's not the best time to do that, but it's the time where it's happening. So it seems like it would be in the best interest of all involved, teacher included, to let him get some attention from peers by doing something different than pinching. Otherwise, we're going to probably get this pinching to continue, or it is going to continue. So I love that because I don't want, I want everybody to not assume, I mean, there are some times where you're going to make some assumptions, like if you're tending to blurt out a lot when you're not called on, probably an attention function. but don't add too much information. Just go with what they give you. It needs to be at least strongly implied by what they give you. Okay. I hope that answered the question or the comment, because I agree with you. Maybe it's not, but maybe it is. All right, A is the best answer. Yes. Okay. You've been working with success on reducing parent-child conflicts using rules of engagement, weekly parent training, a DRA with punishment for arguing, and an increase in the general availability of environmental reinforcement. The parent loses their job, however, and can only afford 1/4 of your hours. What now? Should you? A, terminate service because you cannot complete this amount of service in 1/4 of the time. B, terminate service because this has been the minimum amount of service necessary for this client. C, continue to provide the same direct service for the hours that you do have. Or D, transfer service to parent training and support rather than direct service hours. You're getting good.
Yeah.
You know-
C's and D's.
You know
C's
your
and D's.
alphabet up to D.
I know more than that.
Yeah, I
C's
know.
and D's, Kevin.
C's and D's. Okay, at least we got 2 answers. So thank you, everybody. So nobody likes to terminate, and I want you to at least be this. I hope is a lesson in being flexible, because I need you to at least consider answers. Don't just say, "Oh, it has punishment in it. It can't be the answer." You're probably right, but not sure about that. Or like this, that's terminating the answer. Can't be the answer. Well, you're actually right. A and B are not the answer, but they could be. So let's at least look at that. A, terminate service because you cannot complete this amount of service in 1/4 of the time. Well, okay, it's clear that you can't complete all of this stuff, or at least it should be clear, in 1/4 of your hours. That's true, but you don't need to terminate service. B, same thing, because this has been the minimum amount of service necessary for this client. Now we're getting somewhere. If you actually think that you know, I need 8 hours to do anything of use with this client. If you are advocating for that and you actually think that and you can't get by with less, then yes, that's a reason to terminate. So be flexible and yeah, when would I terminate? Well, that's a consideration. We're not to that point yet in this scenario though. So yes, you could terminate if, look, I cannot, you know, in good conscience do anything because less hours than whatever hours you're talking about. I just said 8, but could be 2 or whatever. You're saying this is the minimum. And if you're only going to fund me for 1 or, you know, whatever is less than that, then yes, it is a reason, because you're saying I'm harming the client, or they're not going to make progress in, you know, less than this. So anyway, it's not A or B in this scenario, but it could be, and I want you to at least look at that. Okay, enough of that. C, continue to provide the same direct service for the hours that you do have. All right, it doesn't sound like you can do that. So basically C is saying status quo, just keep doing what you're doing. Just do 1/4 of it. Or shorten, you know, whatever you're doing in an hour into 15 minutes. I mean, I guess you could say, well, okay, yeah, just do that. But I think that what you're doing there is saying just keep doing the same, but shorter. And D sounds better. You're actually doing something to address the problem. What is the problem? Up here, I hope you all saw it. Well, your hours are cut in 1/4, which means you're probably not going to be able to do all of what you've been doing. So what can you do? And that's what I want you to be thinking about. This doesn't, you know, D doesn't always have to be the answer. It doesn't have to be training and support. But the idea is you need to change what you're doing to adjust and still serve the client the best you can. So D is the answer instead of just continuing to do the same thing. Yes?
I think
Questions?
so. No, I think you
Okay.
addressed it.
So it's D. All right, here we go. After looking at several client data tracking reports of the registered behavior technician with whom you work, you suspect plan drift. Which of the following might best address this issue? Collect IOA data, review data tracking procedures with RBTs, review goals with RBTs, review interventions twice per month with RBTs. Is that where we are?
Coming in hot. Yep, lots of A's, B's, and D's.
Yay. Okay, finally, I think maybe I confused some people. But we're gonna wrap it all up and everybody's gonna understand at the end, right? So what's the problem? What's going on here? Which of the following might best address this issue? What issue? Well, there's plan drift, or you suspect it. So if you think plan drift is happening, what do? Well, first of all, what's plan drift? Put that in your own words. I'd say, and you can say your own thing over there, but I'd say plan drift is they're doing a different intervention, or they're not doing the intervention the way it was written, the way it was supposed to be in the beginning. They've changed what they're doing from what that was intended, all of that. Okay, so if you're not doing the plan the way you're supposed to, what can I do? Well, I want to make sure you are. So if I collect IOA data, that will give me some information on whether there is plan drift. You know, like if Amy and I come watch what you're doing or what the RBTs are implementing, we can both say, you know, it seems like they're implementing about 50% of what it is that was in the original plan. Okay, but that just assesses what the problem is or how bad the problem is maybe. So A, collecting IOA data won't help you intervene to address it. It'll just assess the situation, okay? B, review data tracking procedures. Okay, but who said anything about data tracking? I'm talking about interventions. The plan is being changed in practice. The intervention is changing. So data tracking doesn't talk about the actual intervention. It's just a recording of behavior with the intervention. So I'm kind of like, A is no, B is no. How about C? Review goals. Okay. And again, my mind goes, why would I do that? How would that help? And I'm having trouble seeing it. So maybe I'd say no, maybe. D, review interventions twice per month. There we go. So if every 2 weeks, we're going over the procedures, making sure that we're resetting, basically, you know, hit the reset button and say, remember, these are the steps that we go through. This is the plan. If I keep going over that every couple of weeks, then I'm likely to see the plan stay closer to what I want.
A couple of people changed their answers as you were explaining A, B, and C.
Love it. Love it. So I hope that you can do that. When you get stuck in something, then you can get yourself unstuck by just bringing it back. You know, zoom out, say, what's the problem? Does this answer solve it? And if there are, you know, more than one, you got, oh, shoot, I'm not sure. It's this or this. Which one solves the problem best? Go back to the scenario. Make sure you've understood what it is they want, what it is they've given you. One of those is the right answer. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, great.
So I'm just thinking about, so the treatment drift would not focus on collecting data or anything of that nature, would that be under what's the other one called? Procedural, what is it, procedural?
Fidelity?
Yeah, so when would you focus on IOA, since the treatment drift doesn't really focus on data collection, but more so like, are you doing the intervention correctly?
Right, okay, so yeah, I see plan drift and procedural fidelity is the same thing. We're talking about the plan.
Okay.
And your question is talking about, when would we do IOA? It's when I'm not sure whether we have the same behavior in mind. The definition of the behavior isn't clear enough, for both of us to record it the same. So that's where IOA collection is really helpful. Again, it's just assessing it. But when you get, like I said, 50%, we see the behavior not very, consistently, you and I, then let's make sure we change the definition of the behavior. Let's work on that. That's how you would intervene with observer drift, is collect IOA and make sure you get the definition of the behavior.
And I
Say.
I have a question too, Kevin, because what threw me off was it twice per month.
Okay.
Would you need to do that more frequently because of the drift that's going on?
Well,
Or is
yeah. Or I'm sorry, or what?
No, I was going to say that twice a month kind of threw me off because I was thinking it would be more frequent than that because of the drift.
Sure. And did that steer you away from answering that?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think that's important. So I'm sure you're not the only one that had that question. So I appreciate it. Is that enough? I don't know. Maybe it should be, especially beginning. If you really think this is happening, you might want to meet several times a week, or several times in that first week, and then go to twice a month. I'm not sure what's enough. But clearly what we need is to make sure we're all on the same page with what needs to be done. So I'm going to observe and give you feedback. I'm going to somehow automate the ways that you do the plan so you can't make mistakes, kind of that errorless learning idea. But
Right.
D is the only one I think that addresses the problem. Okay.
I get it overall. Like I said, that part of it threw me
Okay,
off.
great. And there, yeah, other questions?
So somebody just asked if it's inner observer drift, and I've always just heard observer drift, and I think you could say observer drift even if it's something that you came across through inner observer observation.
Yeah, I think so. I think
Yeah.
observer drift is enough, but just to impress your friends, you can say inter-observer drift, and then they'll be like, "What?" You can pretend like that there's something else. But no, I think it's all the same idea. Yeah, that's the thing with ABA, as you guys know, there's just too many AKAs, and then people make up new things. There aren't really new things. We have to try to interpret what they're saying. But yeah, I think observer drift is observer drift, whether it's inter-observer drift or whatever. Yep. Okay, this is all good stuff. I appreciate the questions. The answer, though, to review is D for this one. I'm moving on. So
Okay, yes.
I hear you typing over there. So, which term is least likely, so pay attention to that, to be referenced when discussing the attitudes of science? Is it determinism, technological, parsimony, or pragmatism? Is this a softball?
Mostly B's, but C and D are definitely being mentioned. So no, it's not a softball.
Okay, good. I was looking over there to see if you had the task list up, because the task list references, it's in section A, which is, real short section. It's only going to be about 6 questions on the test. but it lists some of these attitudes of science. And you've probably heard of the 6 attitudes of science, but I think you could probably make a case for there's 7, 8, or 9. Determinism, parsimony, and pragmatism are some of those. Those are, empiricism is another one that just comes to mind, but those are the attitudes of science. B, as most of you recognize, is actually one of the 7 dimensions of science. There's always, things to remember and put in categories, but B, the technological, and those 7 dimensions of ABA are basically trying to define what ABA is. It has all of these features. Whereas the attitudes of science are a little more mushy, but they are all of these ideas that are consistent. That when you're doing scientific investigation, you understand that determinism, one thing causes another. Parsimony, the least assumptions is generally correct. That's the correct answer. And pragmatism is about, does it work? Okay, good. If it worked, then that's good enough for me. That's the idea. Anyway, those are just some, but B is the answer here. That is not an attitude of science.
Can you further explain pragmatism? That's the one that I get the most confused.
Yeah, I can try, because I agree with you. I mean, I'm with you. I get as confused about that one.
My idea of it is,
Yeah,
or what
go ahead.
I've been taught is, it's a phenomenon of, if you do A and B, you'll get C. That's kind of how it was taught. It's a very, although great, very hard to dissect question.
Right, you're like, okay,
like that.
what does that mean? So let me just add to that, because that's not a bad definition, I don't think. It's just incomplete. So if you have A, B, I'm just going to use A and B. You do A and then B happens. So all a pragmatist is saying is that the result, if it went up or went down, whatever you wanted the behavior to do, if it worked, whatever you just did, a pragmatist is saying, great, that's good enough. That means it worked. It seems like the behavior is better, therefore what I did worked. And you don't really care too much about, maybe you do care about control, repeating your experiment to see that it worked, but you're fine with whatever works. That's how I see pragmatism, is the conclusion that, results matter. If I get the result I want, then I assume that what I did was the reason.
A number of people are mentioning in the chat what I would have said too. In my notes when I was studying for this a zillion years ago, I had practical, and that's what a bunch of people are saying too. Does it make sense?
Yeah, does it make sense? So and I think that can all be incorporated in what I'm saying too, and even what you said, A, B, and then C. Then the conclusion is, well, must have been what I did. And I want to get into that thought a little bit more later, but that's how I see pragmatism.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay.
Last one in this set.
Wow. BCBA should create, maintain, and store ongoing documentation of services, including all of the following, with the exception of A, treatment plans with revisions, B, contracts and third-party agreements, C, permanent products produced by the client, D, assessment results.
Well, this may have been the softball.
Yeah, I'm looking at it going, wow, this is too easy.
No one has missed it thus far.
Don't you want to keep the cute little finger paintings and, macaroni art? No, apparently you don't.
Apparently they like C, Kevin.
I'm with you. So we don't have to keep that. We have to keep the other things. This is more of a reminder that these are the things we need to keep. Treatment plans with revisions, contracts, assessment results. This is documentation. And the ethical code doesn't say it was 7 years for everything. It's more about what your local laws and policies may be. The only things that you need to keep for 7 years for sure are your supervision documents. So make sure you have those. Right, everybody, we're back. That went fast, didn't it? Okay. On to set 25. Here we go. Settle in. You would like to encourage your son to practice his free throw shooting. In order to evaluate his practicing, you observe his behavior after school. You record whether he is shooting the basketball at any point in each 30-second interval for a half hour. You are using what?
A lot of C's and D's, but I really love that people are pulling directly from the question. Somebody's saying at any point, that's the clincher for them.
That's a good thing to focus in on at any point. Okay, so if I am doing a momentary time sampling, what does that look like, everybody? Looks like at the end of 30-second or each interval, I would look to see, is he shooting basketball? That's not what it says, so it's not that. Is it permanent product? Like, you know, marks on the net, maybe? Where do we put the marks?
I don't know.
Maybe we have him, you know, shoot off the bank every time, so there's, you know, some little mark that the basketball makes. Anyway, that's not what's going on here. Whole interval, well, I'd have to watch for the whole 30 seconds and see, is he shooting for 30 whole seconds? I don't even know how you do that. How do you shoot for 30 seconds, you know, duration? Don't think so. And then partial interval recording, that's what we've got. At any point during one 30-second interval, was he shooting? Yes, so that's it. And it sounds like most of you got there, but that's how I want you to do that. Just picture it. So D is right.
And I love that. It's kind of like a second grade reading strategy, but pulling evidence from the question. So
Right.
Great job.
Absolutely. Why not? You recorded, oh, here we go again. You recorded that your son was shooting in 45 of these 60 intervals. This data can best be used to report which? A, percent of occurrence for shooting. B, approximate duration of shooting. C, the rate of shots per minute. Or D, how many shots were taken in total?
Looks like they are fond of A for this one.
Really?
Yes.
So surprising. No, you guys are amazing. You're on it. The rate of shots per minute. I'm just looking all these over. So let's go from D all the way up to A this time. If I look at D, how many shots were taken in total? Remember, I was doing partial interval recording, so I'll only know if one shot or no shots were taken. I won't be able to count how many there were. In fact, I'll probably miss a lot of the shots that were taken. So this, I could try to report it. I could say 45, but I'm probably off. It's an underestimate of how many were actually taken. Okay, so let's go to C, the rate of shots per minute. Well, no, I can't really get a rate because I didn't count, again, how many actually happened. I was just estimating. So I could try, I could use, again, 45 being how many shots I recorded and try to figure out, you know, of the 60 intervals and do a rate. It's not going to be very accurate. B, approximate duration, not approximate duration of shooting. No, I didn't record that, so I can't do B. B is an absolute no. C and D are like, yeah, you could do that, but it would be a weird estimate. What you can get now is a percent of occurrence. You could divide 45 by 60 and get, what is that, 75% of occurrence. So that's, I want you to see that, that's a great use of partial interval recording, is if you've got something that you want to have a percent of occurrence, but you don't have a way to limit the opportunities. You want to say, well, shoot, how many opportunities am I going to get this? Well, here you go. You can just say each 30 seconds is an opportunity, and I'm going to see whether they did it or not. And then you can come up with a percentage.
So somebody's, wait, don't move on. Don't go yet.
Okay.
Can you please
Sometimes
explain?
you don't say anything, sometimes you do.
That's why I'm giving you the halt symbol.
Okay, you have to slap me.
All right. Can you please explain over and underestimating with using discontinuous measures?
Can I? I'm not
Yes,
sure.
you can.
Yeah, I think it depends, because I think we're all told, well, partial interval recording tends to overestimate, and then whole interval tends to underestimate, and that's generally true. And that's generally true of duration specifically, but I think you just want to look at the situation. I mean, I would rather that you look at the situation, because obviously this is kind of the opposite. Your partial interval recording resulted in 45. That is, you know, you saw at least one shot during 45 of these 60 intervals, but that is clearly an underestimate. That, like, that's how many definitely happened, but probably there were more than that. So you can't really rely on partial interval always does this and whole interval always does that, except whole interval almost always underestimates. But partial interval, it depends on this. So I think you have to look at the situation that you're given. And I hope you can see in this one right here that partial interval underestimated how many shots were taken. It's 45 was the most that we saw, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't an interval where he took several shots. It just means that we only counted 45. I hope that makes sense, but it depends, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And it's also, that's a good time to say, just don't get caught into that rule. Like the other rule that goes with these discontinuous is, oh, well, you always use partial interval if you want to decrease behavior. You always use whole interval if you want to increase. Maybe, but not necessarily. So don't get stuck into this rule. Oh, there we go. There's the answer because it's always this way. No, you have to find what fits this situation right here. Okay.
All right, moving on.
All right. Ooh, good, a graph. What would you recommend, next for this client? Gotta change that. I got for next for this client, given the chart. A, return to baseline conditions once more. B, implement the game intervention exclusively. C, alternate between violin and game interventions. Or D, implement the violin intervention exclusively. I have to say exclusively.
And can you repeat the answer to the previous question 1 second?
Sure.
I think that it was A for slide 406.
Yep, it was A.
Yep, okay. So now we're on 407. Just
Yep.
and it's looking like people feel pretty strongly about this one.
Oh, good.
They like
What
B.
should we do?
Yeah, they like
Implement
B.
the game intervention exclusively. Okay. That seems like the best thing to do, but let's look at the other answers. So A, return to baseline conditions once more. It seems like that's happened quite a bit. So you have to have a reason, like what would that do? Why would I do it? I would return to baseline conditions once more if I were confused or still unsure about what this last phase, this game phase, had to do in relation to baseline. But I'm not confused about that. Seems like there's plenty of data here to show that this game intervention has the duration of bites to the hand lowest. So I don't need to do A. And if you find a reason to do A, or they're asking you, why would you do this? And A seems like the right thing to do, fine. Here, it doesn't seem to answer the question. So I agree with you guys, implement the game intervention exclusively. Why not? Because it's the one that works the best. Alternate between violin and game. Why? Why would you do something that's not quite as good? Violin works better than baseline, it looks like, but it's not as good as whatever this game one is. So let's not do C. And D, implement the violin intervention exclusively. Again, why? It's not as good. It's higher, but remember, this is duration of bites to the hand. So we want whatever this measure, these bites to the hand, to be lower. We assume that, right? I mean, there's an assumption you can make that we want bites to the hand to actually go down in duration rather than up. So I think that's okay to make that assumption. Anyway, the answer is B. I think we should just stop. These guys got it.
They've got it. Go back to bed.
Yeah, totally. Denise is convinced, or Denise, I'm going to do that. Denise is convinced that his son's autism was caused by vaccinations that were received when his son was 2 years old. Denise continues to make this claim because he noticed signs of ASD in close proximity to the time when his son's vaccinations were given. Denise's evidence is an example of a false analogy, a affirmation of the consequent, an unwanted effect of punishment, or an extinction effect.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And just a reminder, if you could send your answers privately to me. Some people are really affected by reactivity, so that just helps everyone out. And for this one, Kevin, most people like A's and B's. I'm just excited that you get to talk about affirmation of the consequent.
Do I?
You do.
Okay, I shall. A false analogy, let's start there. All right, so the analogy doesn't work. That's what a false analogy is. That these two things, you're saying they're alike, but that's false. You're picking out something that isn't alike. Okay, so that could be, but I don't see exactly the analogy. I see more, we're talking about cause and effect. Talking about this, Denise says this vaccination caused autism. That's the cause and effect. So determinism might be another example. And I want to talk maybe a little bit about reinforcement. But affirmation of consequent does seem to make sense. You're affirming that. So if I could put that in words, the affirmation of consequent that Denise is having is he believed that autism, or vaccines cause autism. So there's a statement. And then his son has autism. And so this is where the affirmation of the consequent comes in. Something happens, and then we decide that whatever happened before that caused it. So vaccines cause autism, that belief, then my son has autism, therefore the vaccines caused it. That's the kind of thing that the affirmation of the consequent describes. So let's talk about these a little bit. Unwanted effective punishment. I don't see that. Did anybody answer that? It seems like an extinction effect. No, again, with these, we need to imagine, is there a punishment here? I don't see it. You need to see a behavior and then a consequence that reduces the future behavior. An extinction, You need to see that the reinforcement is no longer there for behavior. I don't see that.
So can you talk before you move on about circular reasoning? Because a couple of people have mentioned that. So where do you see this in this scenario? And if that was the answer, would that be better?
Circular reasoning. No, I don't think this is an example of circular reasoning. Circular reasoning has to come back to using its own argument as the argument. So if you think of an example for circular reasoning, I'd say I love, psychological diagnoses, because if you say, I have ADHD because I behave in these ways. So you can describe my behavior as ADHD, but then you can do the opposite. You can say, well, my ADHD causes my behavior. So I have ADHD because of these behaviors, and these behaviors are caused because of ADHD. So if you do that, that's circular reasoning. You're not really explaining anything.
And that's
So-
reading.
Oh,
Go ahead.
so with that one, so if you was looking at it from circular reasoning, would it be, my son has autism because he took the vaccination, my son took the vaccination, so now he has autism, or no?
Right. I think you're doing it right, but I'm not sure that that's actually circular. I mean, you're not really saying that vaccines cause autism and autism is caused by vaccine. Yeah, I guess that is a little bit of a circular pattern there. Yeah, I don't think this quite is circular, but yes, you're onto the right idea there.
And
So
so that's
whenever you see there isn't really an explanation given, it's just I'm explaining by explaining what I just said. That's circular reasoning.
And now can you talk about explanatory fiction?
Yes, an explanatory fiction is you're just making something up that seems to fit, right? So you don't know what it is. And I think psychological diagnoses are another good example. We're saying you can describe behaviors, and that's how all psychological diagnoses, including autism, still are diagnosed. It's behaviors. So when you see these behaviors, then we call it something. And it is an explanatory fiction to say, well, that's the cause of these behaviors. So it's both circular reasoning, but it's you're pretending that now because there's intermittent explosive disorder, that explains anything. Or that guy's a psychopath, and that explains something. It doesn't. It just describes. It says this person's a psychopath, and how I know is because they act this way. Doesn't, just calling them a psychopath doesn't explain anything. So it is an explanatory fiction. It's a made up thing that we try to say, well, that causes that. So all of these things are very related. These are awesome questions. I'd even love to do a CE about this, but I gotta move on and talk about affirmation of the consequent. So let's do that. The affirmation of the consequent is very much like reinforcement. And I want you guys to see that too. But I'll just show you this graph, which is on our study guide, but you'll see something like this in Cooper as well. Is that if you're thinking about a study and you've got this behavior going on here, and you've measured the baseline, what you're doing with these experiments, these A-B experiments, is you're comparing these things to try to come up with affirmation of the consequent, which is kind of a weird thing, because affirmation of the consequent is actually a logical fallacy. It's not always true. It doesn't always follow. But anyway, let me go through this. So if you have a baseline of the behavior, what you're doing is predicting that if I did nothing, it would stay around here, like in this baseline. But since I put an intervention in, it changed from baseline. So that's a good thing, we hope, right? We put this treatment into place, and maybe the assumption here, the prediction was, if I put the intervention into place, then the behavior will change. And it did. So the affirmation of the consequent here could say, well, the behavior changed, therefore, whatever I did was responsible for that change. And that can be true, but it also could be that you're making a mistake, that something else caused it, or it was going to happen anyway. Like, I sneezed and the sun came up. Like, okay, so you're going to conclude that the sun came up, therefore it was caused by your sneezing? You could, but it doesn't make any sense. There's no relation. It's going to happen anyway. So that's the main reason, I would say, is we want to have control. We want to go through to verification and then control. We want to know that we repeat this process. Like, if I sneeze again, does the sun rise again? No, it doesn't. And if it did, we'd have to explain that connection. But
And someone's chatting type 1 error question mark.
yeah, type 1 and type 2, the false positive and false negative. Yep, that's right. So yeah, see how all these concepts are very much interrelated. But what I just want to get back to affirmation of the consequent with this. So we've gone through, you make a prediction and then it did change. You know, it didn't stay the same. So here you would make the opposite prediction, that if I continue this treatment, it would have looked like this, right? But I decided to remove the treatment, and here's what the behavior actually did. It reversed down to back to where baseline was at the beginning. This is telling me, oh, it verifies that I am making the correct predictions. And then we have control finally when we do it again. We go back again to treatment and look, the behavior does return to that. So because we can repeat it, we can be more and more sure that we're not just making that mistake, that it was gonna happen anyway. Here we can show, look, we've removed and added this condition, and we've done it at least twice. So it seems like what I've done is really responsible for the behavior.
Okay.
Yeah, I love all of those ideas that you guys chatted, because it's there's a lot of
It's all right
concepts.
here.
A lot of. So what I meant by, I want you to see that affirmation and consequent looks a lot like reinforcement, is if I say affirmation and consequent is kind of like saying, well, something just happened, therefore what happened right before that caused it. You can kind of see how that's very related to the opposite with reinforcement, that I behave and something happens, and now I think that these are related, that my behavior caused what happened or resulted in that consequence. So these are very much related. And this is how we decide whether a study worked or not.
Moving on.
Okay. All of the following are ways to identify possible punishers, except A, duration-based naturalistic observation, B, asking caregivers about items, activities that the client frequently avoids, C, frequency-based observation, or D, pairing neutral stimuli with known punishers. See if this is easier.
Looks like it is so far.
Okay, I should have guessed. Maybe in the next 5-minute break, I'll try to make them all harder.
Yeah, you guys as a group are doing phenomenally well. I don't know if I've ever seen a group be so consistent.
I've never seen such a beautiful group.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what Amy meant to say.
I did mean to say that. So on this one, they're really liking D, Kevin.
Good. I like it that you like D. So let's look at all these possible ways to identify punishers. If I did A, duration-based naturalistic observation, what does that look like? I'm just observing. What does this child avoid? That's pretty much it. I want to see some things. Maybe I salt the environment with things that I think that they will avoid, but I could just see in any natural environment what they tend not to do or play with or whatever. With B, asking caregivers about items that the client frequently avoids. All right, indirect measure, but still I can identify some things that are at least possible. Putative punishers. C, frequency-based observation. Okay, same thing as duration-based. I mean, obviously not the exact same thing, but frequency, and see how many times someone avoids or, you know, approaches an item or interacts with an item or not. And then finally, D. So why D is the answer? Because this is how you establish a punisher. Is I'm going to take something that doesn't have any, you know, power to it. It doesn't have any punishing or reinforcing properties. I can't think that there probably is anything that's actually neutral, but whatever. Something that's more neutral and pair it with a punisher, it's going to become more of a punisher, especially if you repeat that. So D is not a way to identify. Therefore, it's the exception. I did a lot of talking, but you got
wait. Somebody's asking if D is a conditioned punisher.
Yeah, it would. Yep. You're doing it. You're conditioning it.
And I love that people are having an aha moment with this. I get so excited when people send me the little light bulb moment.
Oh, me
Yeah.
too. Yes, love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're just, I mean, we just talked about it on the last side, but so many of these concepts interrelate. And every time you see those connections, I love that. Okay. After returning to the classroom from the playground, a child looks to you and says, swing. You smile and ask, is the swing your favorite? To which the child responds, favorite. The child, in this case, most likely has learned all of the following verbal operants except interverbals, manding, tacting, echoing. I thought about putting interverbaling, but
I'm glad you didn't.
I would just say it.
This is a good one. And I really encourage you guys with the verbal operants. One of the things that I think helped me a lot to pass this test on in terms of verbal operants was to make a little chart and talk about what kind of stimulus they're responding to. So is it responding to a nonverbal or a verbal stimulus? And then I took it a step further and I would say, is this verbal operant? Does it have point-to-point correspondence? Does it have formal similarity? So just a way to categorize those. Kevin, for this one, most people like A, but everything has been answered.
Okay.
Just the way you like them.
Yeah, finally. Thank you for participating this time, guys. Yeah, I think when I look at this, I go, I'm not sure that I see a lot besides clearly there's echo, you know, saying favorite. And I'm not sure whether swing was a mand or a tact, but I don't see any other controlling stimulus for saying swing. So it's got to be one of those. We aren't told that someone said swing and then this child said swing. So there's a mand or a tact, one of those. I'm not sure if they're asking for it or they're just saying it, whatever. But I think you have to conclude, well, shoot, if I'm not sure, I don't know, then A is the right answer. Like it seems like the word swing, you know, when the child said swing here, it was either a mand or a tact, and we do see favorite being an echo. And therefore, I'd say interverbals is probably not in the repertoire, including the example here that's given. This is a mand for an interverbal. You know, you should have an interverbal response here. Is the swing your favorite? Yes or no, or I don't know. I kind of like it, but I like bubbles better. That would be interverbal behavior, and instead we see just an echo. So I think that A is the right answer.
There's a lot of back and forth, and just based on that is what I would have thought with A.
Yeah. I mean, there was a chance for an interverbal response. We didn't see it.
Yep.
And then, like I said, B and C, maybe, but D certainly happened. Okay. Linda has a
Wait, can you go back? I just saw this. So
that one.
people want a little bit further clarification as to why it's C and where do you see manding?
Why it's A.
This one says YC, but just
It's A.
go ahead.
Yeah, because can I just say real quickly, the child says swing,
Mhm.
that the person asks, is swing your favorite?
Mhm.
So the child is initiating, right? So that's not, the child is not echoing
Mhm.
what was said.
Right.
To me, that's a reversal, right? When you said, is this your favorite swing? The child says favorite, so I can see the echo connection there.
Mhm.
But I don't see the first part of it being tacting.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm missing something.
No, I think you're right. I do see the echo here, the favorite. And with swing, I'm not sure. Because the child did initiate, right? You're absolutely right. So they were either manding for swing, did they want the swing? Or are they tacting the swing? You know, they just saw it on the playground. I'm not sure. But it isn't an echo, and it isn't an intraverbal. And here we have their response to, you know, a question should be intraverbal, but it's not. So that's the one that's missing the most. That makes sense? Like that's gotta be what they don't have.
So just to reiterate, a lot of people are having trouble with this one, and they're saying, and the answer for that one was the accept, and that was A.
Right, it's the exception. That's what it's A. Yeah.
So, and somebody's saying there wasn't any evidence for an MO there, so that we could take out Manding in that one.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know that. You're right. If we're going to say for sure it is a mand, if we're going to say, yeah, swing must have been a mand, then we should see some MO. But remember, we may not even know that someone wants something, right? We can't see that necessarily. The signs that are behavioral are reaching for it, or asking for it, or crying when someone else takes it, or whatever. But we don't necessarily know. So I've heard that question many times, or that comment about mands, that they are controlled by an MO. Yes, they are. Probably most things we do are, but you don't necessarily see it. But if the answer is going to be manned, then you should see it somehow. It should be told to you. You should get that indication that there is a desire, a behavior that is trying to get.
This one has a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to keep up with them. Okay. So obviously some people struggled with this one because of the fact that it is negation, which, you know, that's a challenge.
I know it is.
Could you talk about, would it be considered an impure mand or attacked?
Which swing?
Sure.
An impure mand or attack. Sure, it could be. I think we aren't told enough, and this is the confusing part about this question. We aren't really told enough to know whether this saying swing is a mand or a tact, or maybe even an echo that we weren't told. You know, someone else said swing, and then the kid said swing to us. But I think it's clear that it's not an echo. That we didn't hear that. Anyway.
Wait, and one more. Would it be a mand if they were pointing to outside? Like if they were indicating some way they wanted to go to the swing.
Well, there you go. Okay, that's a great example. So if you come into the classroom and a kid says swing to you and points, probably it's a man, because they just came in. You're thinking they probably want to go back out. So I would guess that's a man. But I don't know. Maybe they're just saying that's a swing. I don't know. So that's the thing with these verbal operants. We talk about their definition is how they're controlled. But in that case, if we can see the swing and they say swing, they're pointing to it, I don't know. I don't know whether they want it or they're just labeling it. So that's an example of an impure.
Yeah, and just be careful in this case not to bring too much information into this question that isn't there. Yeah,
there was an echo. We're not sure if there was a mand or attack, but there certainly was an opportunity to do intraverbal behavior, and that wasn't emitted.
Excuse me, Kevin.
Sure.
It's my understanding you are right, but look, it seems to me like an intraverbal. man can be detecting. I mostly like preferring C because there is no cue for tacting. Echoic is fine, but I'm not satisfied with the intraverbal in this situation because it is, I will think it's intraverbal. It can be Manding, it can be echoic, but I'm preferring C. But still, I'm not like agree with the, I'm not like criticizing or not objecting. But it should be like intro. It shouldn't be, it like the except negation is answer should be C then.
Okay.
Oh, it is like intraverbal then.
Can I try to explain it? Sorry.
Of course. I love the discussion.
So I'm looking at it like this. So when I'm reading this, I say, after returning to the classroom from the playground, a child looks to you and says, swing. Now, I think, okay, what's the swing present? So if the child, if the swing, so now it's like adding extra things. I'm like, okay, the child says swing. So technically they're tacting swing because maybe they've seen a swing or maybe, I don't know, they're thinking about a swing. So they're tacting swing. Then you smile and ask, is the swing your favorite? The child repeats favorite. So that echoic is present, so I can get rid of echoic. Because instead of the child responding, yes, it's my favorite, no, it's not my favorite, it just echoed you. So introverbal is the only thing missing because mending, they might be mending for swing or they might be taxing for swing. So we know the child is able to either tack or mend as well as have echoic, but we don't see no evidence of them being able to answer the question that you asked. And that's why introverbal is missing because they didn't answer the question you asked, which is a key component.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. That's how I see it too. So regardless, we're going to move on obviously, but because we're not sure whether the child saying swing was a mand or tact, and there is an opportunity for them to respond to an intraverbal or have an intraverbal response, and they don't, that's the one I'm like, yeah, that one's definitely missing. They do not have intraverbal behavior here. And that's pretty clear. At least that's how I'm reading it. So I appreciate all that discussion. I really do.
Well, we're not done with the discussion.
Oh,
Kevin.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I'm like, this question is really, really something that I need to to fight with. I mean, like I have to attack it because I do see formal similarity, but not point-to-point correspondence. So I don't know. You have to explain me that.
So when you say you're seeing point-to-point, but not formal, so what do you mean?
Because the way it's delivered is the same way, but the information are different. So I can see some intraverbals. I mean, I don't know. That's how I look at it.
I got you. You are seeing some intraverbal in here.
Yep.
Okay.
Me too.
Me too.
I like it. A couple of people are saying they're done overthinking it. It's A. But
no. I promise we're gonna move on right here. But I need to say, do you have more?
Yes. So somebody's also saying, also favorite could be an answer that it is favor. So it would become an interverbal rather than a echoic.
Who's your favorite? What's child response favorite? Okay, so this is what I think I need to say before we do move on. It's not an interverbal. There isn't interverbal behavior here. If someone just responds favorite when you ask them, is the swing your favorite? That's not clear that they're communicating. I mean, it is communicating what you just said. So it might be that they're trying to say, yes, it's my favorite, but they didn't. And so if it's like this, it's clear enough that I'm telling you, like we can discuss whether it might be mand or tact, but clearly this isn't an interverbal. And I want you to see that. You need to have some other response that isn't the same thing. You have to say, is the swing your favorite? And they go like this. That's an interverbal right there. You can do that. or they go like this, or they say, yes, it is, or there has to be something that's different than the original response. You have to add communication, and it isn't here. But anyway, this is I love the discussion, but I want to make sure you see it. There's not an interval there. I'm sure about that part. And I think that's the best answer. We can argue about that part. Okay, here we go. Moving on. This is awesome. Linda has a grocery list ready to go as usual. As she puts items into her cart, she crosses these items off her list. Linda's crossing off behavior is most likely positively reinforced, positively punished, negatively punished, or negatively reinforced.
Everybody's like, shoo, something I can wrap my head around.
Now I'm going to go rewrite that question a bunch of times, do different things with it.
So the majority like D for this one, but there are also C's and A's.
Okay.
So let's talk that one through.
Well, let's just imagine it through, because we are, these, the answers, the options that you've got there. So if I have a list of 5 things and I cross one off, what would I be getting from that? So I have a behavior, there it is. And what's the result? What's the consequence? Is something added or is something taken away? I am doing something, but please don't confuse that as positive. The behavior is positive. I'm doing something, I'm crossing it off. But the result is that's no longer on my list. It's removed from my list. It's removed the burden from my mind of all the things I have to get. And then my wife's going to be angry if I don't come home with all that stuff. So it's negative reinforcement. That's what she's doing, is taking something off of her list. And you could say, well, Kevin, you don't know about the future, right? So, I think we do. She crosses one thing off and then she crosses another thing off. It's not that she crosses one thing off and it's negatively punished, so she never crosses anything off again. So she keeps doing it. So I'm going to say, I think, without too much assumption, this is negatively reinforced.
And I like how many of you included that word removed in your answer. You definitely saw that an aversive was being taken away.
Yeah. And so if you say positively reinforced, which I would assume would be the other answer that some of you gave, just be careful not to mix the behavior with the consequence. The behavior might be yelling or, punching or crossing things off. That's the behavior. But what's the consequence of it? Then what happens? And here it's taken off your list. That's how I read it. D is the answer.
Got it.
Okay, here we go. Jenny, a 2nd grader. She kicks adults in the shin when she doesn't get her way. As a BCABA, you are asked to observe, collect data, and determine the function of Jenny's behavior. After carefully doing so, you come to the conclusion that Jenny kicks people's shins when she is asked to do something she doesn't want to do. You verify this by asking Jenny to engage in preferred versus non-preferred tasks and collecting data. The behavior can be evoked. You have demonstrated stimulus control. You are using which dimension of ABA? Well, that's a long one.
I know. Probably should have started the question on that one.
I know I should have. Maybe you guys did.
Such a sharp group. Unanimously so far, we have C.
Okay. I spent all that time making this long question and you guys get it right. That's it. It's analytic. That's about the control. Stimulus control, experimental control, functional control, all kinds of words for it. Internal validity. The idea is you have Not just compared baseline to something else to intervention, but you've done it again. You're sure now.
Lovely job, everyone. That was really, yeah.
That was too easy. But let's look, because you know Kevin loves to do this, and I want you to kind of, even though you got it right, if it's more difficult, I want you to see, is it generality? Well, what if it was? If it were generality, we'd be talking about how much the behavior lasts over time, or transfers to other settings or other behaviors or other persons. There's some kind of, you know, continuance or transfer of the behavior. And it isn't really talking about that, you know, how long it lasts or where the behavior transferred to. If it was effective, we'd be talking just about, or the main idea would be about how effective, to use that word over again, but did the intervention work? Did it result in what we hoped it would? And enough, did it change enough that we can say it was effective, rather than, you know, didn't change very much or went in the opposite direction. And then technological is about the recipe. I love that as an analogy. So if you haven't heard that, there it is. Technological, you gotta have the recipe so someone else can pick it up and see if they can make the same cake or do the same intervention with the same results. So it's not about the replication so much, but technological is about having the recipe that someone else can follow. That's it. Anyway, you're right, it's C. Great. People often report feeling sad after disappointment. What's one way to explain this phenomenon? A, when an expectation is not met, an individual may be reinforced by sad feelings. B, if a met expectation is a reinforcer, then disappointment is a negative punishment. C, disappointment stems from the recesses of the soul and tugs at our hearts. Or D, depressed people feel sad because they have depression. Well, some of those answers are obvious.
I know, I'm like, please, no one pick C. Just don't do it.
Oh, I'd be tempted if that were on the test. You can get a couple wrong.
So this will be fun to talk through, but we're split about 50-50 A and B, as it should be.
Yeah, okay, so not C and D. I think as you go through those, it's pretty easy. So I'd say, like, if I'm doing the yes, no, maybe, you say maybe, maybe, no, no, right?
Got some mentalistic stuff happening there, and some circular reasoning.
Circular reasoning, right there. Depressed people feel sad because they have depression. So it's also an explanatory fiction. Doesn't explain anything. You just said nothing. Just went around the wheel, the hamster wheel. We're gonna get hamsters, right? No. Okay. When an expectation is not met, an individual may be reinforced by sad feelings. Well, that's an interesting idea. So expectation is not met. Something happens. So there's a stimulus. Everything's a stimulus, but let's talk about it that way. So here's the thing that happened. That's my stimulus. And I may be reinforced by sad feelings. Maybe, but there's a stimulus and then this response to the stimulus, rather than what I expect with reinforcement, and you should too, is that you have a behavior and then you have a consequence, a stimulus change. Something happens as a result of a behavior. A is talking more about a stimulus occurs and then there is a response or a behavior, thought, feeling, whatever, in response to it. So this doesn't really talk about reinforcement as closely as I want it to. So this sort of leaves us with B, but let's check that out. If a met expectation is a reinforcer, then disappointment is a negative punishment. Expectation is a reinforcer. So I want that reinforcer. There it is. There's an establishing operation in effect, and then disappointment. I don't get the reinforcer. Okay, so something, I'm guessing that the disappointment means that that reinforcer is removed somehow. Negative punishment. Well, these are a little convoluted, I'm not sure, but B is the best answer because I can't make A work, and you guys know C and D are not it. So I think B is the best answer we have. If that's a reinforcer, then not getting that reinforcer could be a negative punishment. We don't know what the behavior is, but that's the best description anyway.
So a lot of people say that, B, the first part really works. It's the second part that is a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Because again, we don't know the behavior, but
Yeah.
I think that still works. If we say, okay, you get disappointed because whatever behavior you didn't result in the reinforcer.
I like that somebody can relate this to passing the exam. That's the expectation.
Yeah, that's your expectation.
Yeah.
And your behaviors, were punished or not.
All righty,
Okay.
moving on.
And I'm glad we could at least show you another example of circular reasoning. That's a great one.
And the final answer for that was B.
B. Yep. Okay, not C. All right, here we have another long one. So let me try and just read the last sentence first. Which would be the most effective and efficient option to get your client to and from the classroom? You okay?
Yes.
Okay. Your client's classroom has two entrances. One is locked as there are books stacked against it, and the other entrance is right at the front of the school where the buses stop. The main entrance is heavily trafficked, especially when the buses are there. The problem is that your client hits other students in order to have space around him when he's walking. Which would be the most effective and efficient option to get your client to and from the classroom? Okay. A, use a DRO for any behavior besides hitting. B, use a DRI, such as putting hands in pockets and saying, excuse me, instead of hitting. C, open the other less trafficked classroom entrance. Or D, use a DRL procedure to reduce the frequency and magnitude of hitting. Okay.
Well, I can tell you this, people do not like A and D, so you can get rid of those, talk those through, but then really go into B and C.
Okay. I was hoping you guys would like smattering of A and D, but all right.
No, they're too smart for you.
I know, I'm discovering that. Like I should have assumed, but A, use a DRO for any behavior besides hitting. So nobody liked this answer, but what would that do or what would that look like? Say, just don't hit for a while and you can have something, right? Or you can get out of something. So the problem with that, I think you saw this, but that doesn't give us really another replacement. Don't have to have that, at least stopping hitting might be good, but it doesn't seem to fit the scenario to me. So if you're looking at the theme, it's like, the problem is there's too many people here and he doesn't do well with people around. So we can try to address that by saying don't hit. So maybe that stops him from hitting, but hopefully there's a better answer. So let's try that. B, use a DRI. Okay, great. So something incompatible and you're not going to hit at all, but you're going to do something else, such as putting hands in pockets and saying, excuse me, instead of hitting. Okay, I like that. So you're going to stop hitting because it's incompatible with putting your hands in your pockets and saying, excuse me. All right. So that's one way to maybe address it. And then C, open the other less trafficked classroom entrance. Well, why would we do B or C? Why would we do one over the other? Well, I think the answer is back in the question. And if you get stuck, again, this is what I recommend, go back to the scenario. What did I miss? What's the theme? What are they asking? What would be the most effective and efficient option? So to get your client to and from the classroom, but I think it's also saying, to and from the classroom without hitting. There's the implied part. So if that's it, effective and efficient, and I look at B and I look at C, and I know B will take some training and some time. We're going to have to, do this over and over. We're going to have to practice it. And C doesn't take much time. You got to just take the books out of the way and open that entrance. So let's just do that. Let's just avoid the whole situation where there's too many people. We can work on teaching these things. It's not like B is a bad answer, but if you're talking about the most effective and efficient, C is the right answer.
And somebody just said my favorite thing, in that with parsimony, sometimes we don't have to intervene. And I think that that's a really important thing that people miss, and especially people taking this test, because you're like primed to intervene. But if the behavior is decreasing on its own, sometimes you just get to sit back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that that's often underlooked, or overlooked, sorry, underappreciated and overlooked, is you can change motivating operations so that people don't want to engage in behaviors, or you can remove the opportunity to engage in behaviors. And
Kevin?
Those two things are huge. Yeah, go ahead.
So when I first look at it, I was thinking about the terms of parsimony, meaning that sometimes you look at things that they're more simple than it is. So just open the door will be resolve the problem than going all over to intervene the child or whatever.
Yeah, it's about parsimony. You're right. Totally. Good. I didn't talk about D. Doesn't sound like very many people liked it anyway, but if you're going to use a DRL procedure to reduce the frequency and magnitude of hitting, first of all, I think I want you to see with DRL, you're generally going to keep that behavior around. You are reinforcing it, even if it's a very thin interval schedule. That's what you're talking about doing, is increasing the IRTs, decreasing the interval schedules to a point where it's still maintained, but just at a low rate. And here, why would we want to do that? First of all, we probably don't want hitting to remain in this person's repertoire. We want to replace it if we're going to work on it directly. And second, I'm like, I don't see how that helps the question here or answers the scenario. So it's not effective, efficient, and doesn't really seem to help. So that's a no. Anyway, I think C is the best answer, and I hope you see that. Even if you decided B originally, I hope you can change your answer now to C, just because we're talking about effective and efficient. That's it. Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, I'm just checking. I want you to be okay.
Good.
Okay. Moving on. In a recent student planning meeting, a teacher agreed to prompt a student to use a replacement behavior. You pop into the teacher's classroom for 10 minutes, hoping to see the teacher prompt the student at least once. This is most appropriately described as which one? Are you doing whole interval recording, momentary time sampling, partial interval, or play check? Or plot check, like you like to say. Tomato, tomato. I feel like you're going to get this.
Well, this one is distributed a little more than I would think, but that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, that is okay.
Yeah.
All right, if it were, let's go through this. So if it were whole interval recording and answer A, then I would pop in for 10 minutes and I would hope to see the teacher prompting the student for the whole time, the whole 10 minutes. That's not what it says. So let's say no and move on to B. Momentary time sampling. I would pop in and I would see at the end of my 10-minute interval whether the teacher was prompting the student. Not quite what we're looking for. So I think you can see I'm taking you down the road to C or D. So C is partial interval. If I were doing that, I would pop in, and sometime in that 10 minutes, I would hope to see them do that at least once. And that's pretty much exactly what it says. So C sounds like the best, but let's check out D. Is D better? Well, plate check, okay. So whether you say plate check or plot check doesn't matter, but how you see it is it's momentary time sampling for groups. So let's say I have 5 students that I want to be, engaged reading, looking at their book. Okay, so I would check at the end of my 10-minute interval and see if those 5 students, or how many of those 5 students, are engaged in that task at that time, at that moment. And that's not what's going on here either. So it is C. Capiche? Any questions?
No, I think this is an interesting thought though. Somebody's saying they didn't choose C because the 10 minutes of an interval is too long. They didn't be broken up, so.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a really good point. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. So if you got bothered like that, or by that, not just whoever chatted that, but anyone else, then I want you to ask this. Again, this goes back to my admonition for you to be flexible. Like, let's say you say that to yourself. God, I don't think it's any one of these because 10 minutes is too long an interval. Then your job still is to find a better answer. Like, yeah, 10 minutes might be too long. So is there an answer that talks about a shorter interval? Is there an answer that, fits this scenario better because of the 10 minutes? Yeah, look for those things. And I can't find it. So you're right, 10 minutes might be a really long interval, but C is still the best answer. So if you're looking for a better answer, I don't see it.
And a lot of people keyed into that at least once.
Yeah, right.
And I think that
that's a good way to.
That's probably what would have set me apart on this one is, oh yeah, I know what they're talking about.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, I could write it so that it said at least once, right before the bell rings or something like that, which might actually mean the end of the interval, or, I could imply that somehow. So be careful. But yeah, at least once sounds like at least you want to consider partial interval as an answer. Okay, hope that's clear enough. C is the right answer here. Here we go. If you've taught a child how to answer the phone, which would you do to support maintenance? Would you A, ask parents to let the child answer the phone, but only on some weekends? B, give the parents a toy phone for the child to practice with at home? C, ask parents to buy the child an iPhone? Or D, allow the child to answer the classroom phone? Which would you do?
D's, A's, and B's.
Wow.
C's out of there.
Why not? I think some parents would. Not us though, huh?
No.
Probably not. Okay, not you guys, not behavior analysts, right? So let's look at what the problem is, or what it is they want from us. And to me, I'm going to summarize that for they want maintenance. And what is maintenance? It's continued contact with reinforcement. So please get that one, that definition in your own words, or use my words, whatever, but understand that it's really about this behavior has to continue to be reinforced. So it needs an opportunity to be emitted, and it needs to be reinforced when it is. That's what maintenance is about. So that's what I'm looking for. How do I get this behavior to continue to be reinforced now that we've taught them how to answer the phone? Ask parents to let the child answer the phone, but only on some weekends. Okay, the first part sounds good. Second part, why? Why am I limiting it to weekends? I don't know. But sure, I'll give it a maybe for answer A, because ask parents to let the child answer the phone. That would provide reinforcement for answering the phone. Great. How about B? Give the parents a toy phone for the child to practice with at home. All right. Here's where I want you to see this doesn't provide maintenance. And, you know, sure, we could use a toy phone for some purposes. You know, if we're talking about just dialing numbers and hearing beeps or something, sure, or how to hold it, I don't know what, but we're not going to get reinforcement with a toy phone though. We're going to answer the phone and maybe there's a pre-recorded Elmo on there or something, but they're really not gonna get reinforced for answering the phone. There's nobody on the other line. That's what we taught them to do, is answer the phone when somebody's calling. That's what we need. So the toy phone just doesn't do it. But I would say where we are was A was a maybe, because the first part sounded good. And B is, no, I don't think that's, certainly not better than A, and I don't think it's right. Anyway, C, we skip, because obviously that's not it. D, allow the child to answer the classroom phone. And that's where I'm going with this. Okay, so A and D are probably the answers I want you to consider. And A, for whatever reason, limits answering the phone, whereas D, it gives you more opportunities. I mean, we aren't told how many calls come into the house or the classroom. So without that information, let's just assume they're the same. And with the classroom phone, you're going to get more opportunities than just on some weekends. So you need an opportunity to do it and to get reinforced for it. So D is the right answer. That's going to give you the most opportunities, or this kid the most opportunities to engage. Okay.
I think so.
Okay. Again, that one's maintenance is about, you got to keep getting reinforced for it. Got to be able to do it and receive reinforcement. Okay. Sylvia, a BCBA, wants her client, a 17-year-old female, to meet as many milestones as possible, especially those that open up new contingencies. The most appropriate treatment goal would be A, use joint attention and interactive play using Barbie dolls. B, ask peers for rides to work. C, have her independently access the school's homework support page. Or D, teach her to run the classroom's DVD player. Would you like some?
Wait, you have to do it again. So A's, B's, and C's. Oh, and now some D's.
Okay. All right. Like Amy's strategy here, when you're reading the scenario, the thing that pops out at me, and I want it to pop out to you, is especially those that open up new contingencies. So the first part is kind of like, we want her to learn everything. And this sentence helps me, helps you, especially those that open up new contingencies. That sounds like behavioral cusps, right? lots more contingencies to find reinforcement.
And a
That's
bunch
what
of people are
behavioral
saying
cusps.
cusp. They got that.
Excellent, great. So if you're on that path, you're thinking about cusps, and this is a lot like what we just talked about with maintenance, but the idea with behavioral cusps is lots of opportunities. I want lots of opportunities given this behavior. So if you learn this, then it's going to open up lots of doors for you, is how I like to put it, but put it however you want. So we're looking for that. A, does this answer open up lots more doors? Use joint attention and interactive play using Barbie dolls. Perhaps it opens some doors. Can you just now do it with Barbie dolls, that you have joint attention and you're able to engage in interactive play? Or does this, transfer to other areas of life where you can now use interactive play? I don't know. But, it's a decent answer, and it's the first one we come to. So be like, okay, maybe. B, ask peers for rides to work. I want you again to think of where this leads. So if I learn to ask peers for rides to work, perhaps I can learn to ask other people for rides. That's the skill that I'm being taught, and probably as far as it goes. So that doesn't seem to open a lot of doors. It's just learning to ask for rides. Maybe you go, again, I think you're going too far if you go, well, that sounds like you're learning to mand, and then you can learn to mand other things. Like, no, it's pretty specific about asking for rides to work. So that doesn't open up a lot of contingencies. So I would say B is not as good as A. Then C, have her independently access the skills homework support page. Okay, so if you can access the support page, you get feedback from whoever, but you can also independently access other pages, and clearly the internet has lots of pages to view. So that's where I'm going. Well, okay, if you can access a page, you can access other pages, that seems to open up more contingencies than A or B. And then we just have to compare it to D. There's another lesson in there, is once you get an answer that you like, it's a yes or even a maybe, if you like it the best so far, all you have to do is decide whether the other answers are better. If they aren't better, then just stick with what you got. So I like C the best, and then I read D, teach her to run the classroom's DVD player. Okay, so if you know how to run a DVD player, you know how to run a DVD player. Maybe other DVD players. And I just saw a red box the other day. I'm like, really? People do DVDs still?
So somebody pointed out, and I think this is a good thing, that B would allow for them to open up some new contingencies because of those social interactions. And then I knew this would come up. Can we talk a little bit about cusp versus pivotal?
Oh, I knew that would come up too.
Yeah, it always does.
I know it always does, and I have
leaps and hops, everyone, leaps and hops.
Tell me about it.
Well, I just always think of cusp as this like monumental thing that's going to open up these new contingencies, and as pivotal as being these little hops. So you learn something new because of something that you've already learned. So I kind of associate it with generative learning or derived relations. That's how I differentiate them. But how do you differentiate them? I know what you're going to say.
I know you do. Sorry, go ahead, say it.
I know that you're going to say, oh man, it doesn't really matter. They're very similar. Yeah.
I am. And let me give you an example. Like, I want to address the other comment about B, but I think when we're talking about cusp behaviors and pivotal behaviors, you can say, well, okay, if I'm thinking about functional communication training and manding. Well, the manding itself is a cusp behavior, clearly, because once you can ask for things, then you can ask for all kinds of things. So that's a pretty amazing skill, but it's also a pivotal behavior. So if I command for this thing, then the response can change a little bit. Response generalization can change a little bit to accommodate all kinds of other changes, other mands. So they're not always that connected, but I think there's so much alike that really you don't need to tease them apart much. I think pivotal response training or a pivotal behavior is talking about response generalization a little bit more than cusp behaviors are. But in both, I think you're just looking for generalization. You're looking for opportunities for opening reinforcement doors.
So just to reiterate, the answer to that one was C.
Yeah.
And somebody's asking to go a little deeper with D. Why is it not D?
Well, because I see that, and if you see it differently, great. I just want the feedback. Is I see that as a dead end skill, which is the opposite of a behavior cusp. So behavior cusps gives you, the maximum number of, opening up the world to you, from crawling to walking to running to driving. All of those are obvious behavior cusps. They open up all kinds of new opportunities. Whereas learning to run a DVD player,
if you even have one anymore.
I know.
Yeah.
That's the antiquated nature of the answer is on purpose. Like, if I taught you to do punch cards, it doesn't lead anywhere, is where I want you to see that. If it doesn't go anywhere, it's not a cusp behavior. And it's all relative, but that opens relatively few doors, is what I'm saying. And I wanted to go back to this where somebody commented that B might be a good answer, because if you ask peers for rides to work, well, then you can start a conversation and you can have, interactions. Okay,
Kevin?
that's true, but it's going too far. Yes, who's up? Who am I talking to?
This is Adva. So when I was looking at this question, the first thing that I saw that we've been looking for a behavior cusp. So I know we're in 2022 and DVDs are not usable anymore, but be surprised.
Yes, some people still do.
I have my kids in the car playing DVDs, and sometimes they put some some new songs to teach ABCs or other content. So using DVDs actually reinforce for being exposed to new contents. Although, in your mind, DVDs are something, not being used in this world anymore. Yeah. But when I think about it, it's still for me something more cusp than pivotal. Although C, yes, is something more current, but if we can look at both of this, C and D both could be cusps for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I want to just kind of piggyback on that. I really like this logic that somebody is focusing on for why they picked C. And they say, I focus more on a 17-year-old learning to use a support page that might lead to future behaviors in accessing the internet to apply for jobs, shopping, attend virtual school, tutoring. Mm-hmm. So I think that one really is a better example of a cusp behavior.
Yeah, and like I said, this is all, it's not all, but many of our concepts are continuums, it's a spectrum. And so, yeah, it's relative. If I said DVD player, that's different than saying cassette tapes or 8-track, operator license. There is a point where it really doesn't lead anywhere. So yes, you could, if you know how to play one DVD, you can play many different DVDs. And if you can access the internet in one page, then maybe you can access other things. All you need is Amazon and Google, right?
So Elizabeth, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself?
Thank you. So I thank you for sharing that comment about C. Yeah, I feel the same way. Whoever's rubbing their face, I'm really stuck on this one. But so I really like the information behind C about opening different pages, applying to jobs. Yes, that was great. I'm really still stuck on B, because as you're in that ride, you can say, oh, where did you get that shirt? That's Manding and that's social. Oh, what car is this? Again, more information. You're learning about LRFCC, you're getting Manding, you're tacting, all that fun jazz. So I feel like that's opening up more contingencies. And also we said looking at generalization, that's generalizing to across different man. So that's why I'm still stuck on B.
Yeah. Okay. And this is, I'm really glad because I wanted to address that anyway, Elizabeth. So I was gonna say, I don't want to call you out, but I'm saying, I think you're adding too much to it. So if you're saying, I ask peers for rights to work, what that accomplishes is that I'm asking peers for rights to work. You're right. There might be conversation, there might be extra, but I think we're adding that if we say that. So
Yeah, I
if
tend to do that. It's okay. Call me out. I tend to do that.
no, but you're not the only one. That's why I'm willing to, like that's, so you could say the same with the others, but not quite as well. You could say, well, accessing a school's homework support page means I can access other pages. Asking for rides to work means I can ask other people for rides or to other places perhaps. But those, it just says what it is. So let's not get too much into, well, that could lead to this and that could lead to that. Because you're right, it could, but let's just go with what we're given. And that's the hard part. So I think C is still the best answer, but I'm hearing you,
So I have a kind of general thought that we can discuss.
Okay.
Somebody's saying when we're developing the interventions, we need to also think about resources and response costs to use it. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there are many things I like about the 5th edition task list, but I really did like in the 4th edition under interventions, we kind of had identified, like, I think it was, what was interventions? J, like the first 8 of them.
Forget that now.
I know we should forget it, but we're really good to have this kind of little evaluation checklist about an intervention being a good intervention or not. And those are definitely things that you would kind of want to consider as you're going through.
Yeah. And that is a great point. And please, just the same thing I just said, not just to Elizabeth, but to all of you, is don't add too much information. So if you are given that sort of scenario, let's not add too much into it. Let's just go with what they give you.
We're going to start an overthinkers support group.
I think we should.
Because
it's hard.
Yeah, it is.
You're like, well, I could see that, and then that would lead to this, or that would help them in some other way. Or if, the scenario had this to it, then this would be a better answer. Okay, great. So if you're talking about costs and benefits, there should be some indication of that in the scenario, that's an important thing. That, yeah, we want this to not cost too much. If it doesn't say that, then just choose the answer that seems like it will solve the problem the best. Yeah?
All righty.
Okay. I just love this discussion. I hope we're doing okay on time, but here we go. Alexei sneezes up to several times per day without covering his mouth and nose. In order to eliminate this behavior, you, as the behavior analyst, I assume, suggest A, encouraging Alexei to cover his mouth when sneezing and wash his hands afterward. When he fails to cover his mouth, make Alexei cover his mouth and wash his hands 5 times. Or B, having parents give his allergy medication daily. When he fails, you're going to see this is repeated. When he fails to cover his mouth, make Alexei cover his mouth and wash his hands 5 times. So I'll just read the first part of C and D. But C, taking Alexei outside when it looks like he will sneeze and put a Kleenex into his mouth, or to his mouth. Or D, telling Alexei that the rule is to keep sneezes to yourself and provide Kleenex, etc., etc. Give you some time to think about that.
I do love it when people send me answers with a question mark.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be great if we could do that on the test? I think it's this. So for this one, Kevin, we're looking at a lot of variety in our answers, but no one's really crazy about C.
Okay, don't want to take them outside, huh? Okay. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting one, but you've noticed already, because I mentioned it, but you noticed it, that the second sentence is the same in all of them. So you're going to do that regardless. And I think that helps us a little bit decide, well, okay, it's just the first sentence that discriminates one from the other. So we're going to encourage him to cover his mouth when sneezing and wash his hands afterward. That sounds like a DRA, and why not? And then the rest we're going to do regardless of, you know, whether we choose A, B, C, or D. How about B? So I'm saying I like A. I would say, yeah, that's a good answer. B, having parents give his allergy medication daily. Okay. So if you answered that, then I can see that. And I think because that second part is the same, you're gonna make him, if he fails to cover his mouth, make Alexi cover his mouth and wash his hands 5 times. You're intervening, not just with the allergy medication, but you're intervening with his behavior. So if he fails to cover his mouth, you're gonna have him do it right the right way anyway. So it seems like that, to me, makes A still a better answer than B.
And I'm not gonna lie, B makes me nervous with the fact that we don't know if there's a medical thing.
Yeah, right. We don't, and even if we're told, that's where I'm going with it. Like, well, you know what? If he had to take allergy medication, and that might solve the problem. Yeah, okay. But he's not covering his mouth still when he sneezes. So that might prevent the sneezes, but it doesn't help him learn the new thing he should do. And even if he takes his allergy medication and then sneezes, we're still going to do, when he fails to cover his mouth, make him cover his mouth and wash his hands 5 times. We're going to do this overcorrection. So you can't get rid of that. It's in all the answers. Still, it makes me go A is a better one. I want him to cover his mouth. That makes sense. Anyway, that's where I'm going with it. So if you said B, I get it. I just think it's not quite as good as A. It doesn't solve the problem as well. C, taking Alexi outside. Nobody seemed to like that. D, telling Alexi that the rule is keep sneezes to yourself. That's almost a DRA, I think. You're giving some instruction and providing a Kleenex, but you need to know that that works. I mean, it might work with, you know, an older kid, or, you know, a kid who clearly, yeah, is following your verbal instructions like that. But we don't know, you know, what level of understanding Alexi has. So just telling him what to do, I don't know if that's going to work as much as A. Make sure you cover your mouth. Encourage you to do that. So I think A is the answer.
And I just want to, you know, comment on B, because if I were going to pick B, I would want to see something in the scenario that it was saying it was a medical issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's great to actually stop and look at that one for sure. I look at it and I go, that could be it. B could be the answer. If he just takes his medication, then maybe he won't sneeze. But I also am not teaching him what to do. He doesn't cover his mouth when he sneezes. So that's the other thing. Besides, we're already going to do this overcorrection procedure. Might as well do a DRA or a DRI, whatever. But that's where I'm going with it.
Okay.
So yeah, those are,
so
any
comments on that one? Nope, I think we can go.
Let's see, that's a
Can I
no.
say something?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, it's my name is under Avi, but I'm Adva. This is my husband's
Adva.
account.
Okay. Yes, I keep seeing Avi. I'm like, okay.
Yes. I'm sorry. I was rushed going into it. So anyway, first thing that I was thinking of was, like, before even we intervene, we have to consider any medical issues.
Mm-hmm.
So first thing, I mean, I know it's if you would say we take him to the doctor to see if he has something, that would be a better answer. But I was first thing thinking about, okay, before we even intervening, we maybe have to make sure that it's not a medical situation, and then intervene. So that was the first thing that came up to my mind before even I look at other questions. So yeah, that was kind of tricky, because if it was like, yeah, we need to take him to the doctor to see if he doesn't have any medical issue, and then we intervene, that would be the best answer.
Yes, I agree. So we could change B, if B would be the right answer in this scenario, if it said something like he's forgetting to take his allergy medication, or his parents have failed to give it to him, so we're going to help out. Whatever, even that he has allergies might help make that a better answer.
Yeah,
you're right. You're right to be looking at that. So, I mean, I was trying to trick you, and I'm okay with that. I'll apologize later when you pass. But that's it. That's great. I'm glad you're thinking about that. I just don't think that's the right answer for this one.
All right, one more in set 2.
Okay. Oh, wow. There's a new sheriff in town, you think to yourself as you step into a new position supervising 10 ABA staff. When you review the previous 2 months worth of data, you notice systemic problems with inaccurate data tracking, incorrect procedures being applied, and low client outcome measures. The most likely way to, put that in all caps there, to remedy these problems is to what? A, have less indirect staff supervision and increased progress monitoring. B, increase reinforcement of behavior change agents. C, interview staff to determine individual contingencies. Or D, have more frequent and direct staff supervision.
Ah, you softballed them on the last one.
I know.
They're too good for this.
Agreed. Are you saying we're done?
No, I'm just letting a couple more people answer. I hate cutting people off, and I always do on this. But pretty much across the board, people like D.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with D, right? Have more frequent and direct staff supervision. That's probably the best thing. I'm trying to think of other answers, because we did talk about plan fidelity or plan drift or whatever. We're just talking about treatment fidelity. Sorry, that's what I meant, but it's all the same. The idea, okay, so we could have more frequent meetings. We could make things easier for staff to follow. We could provide, this sort of goes there with provide reinforcement for doing the procedures correctly, but this is a little bit vague where it says increase reinforcement of the behavior change agents. Like, yeah, reinforcement for what? And that's what I need to know for B to be better. Anyway, I don't see any of those other things I'm suggesting, so D seems like that's the best thing to do.
Well, and 2 people have kind of thought this through, and I love this. Let's put them in order. So somebody's saying, would it be D, C, B, A? And another person's saying, well, what's the second best answer? So I like that. I like that you guys are digging deep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's hard to say in this one, but I'm going to go it like this. D is the best, so it's first. And then second, I think is B, but I need to add information, which I know that's bad, but I'm going to do it anyway, because, you know, D is the answer. But if B, it's the second best answer if we're saying increased reinforcement of those behavior change agents for following the plan, or when they follow the plan, then I think that's the second best answer. The interview, whenever I hear interview or survey or something along those lines, I'm thinking that's indirect. I don't like that. I want to actually observe staff if I want to understand their contingencies. What drives them? What are they motivated by? And you could see this if you watch staff long enough. You're like, you tend to like doing these kinds of tasks. You avoid these other ones. You know, you talk about some things and you don't want to talk about others. There are contingencies that you can observe. And interviewing, I don't know. It's just an indirect measure. So I don't like it as much. So I'd say D's the best, B's the second, C's the third. And then I don't know why you would have less. Increased, it was indirect staff supervision, increased progress monitoring. Yeah, you can monitor the progress. I'm not sure if I should put this last or C last, honestly, just because if I can monitor the progress of these clients and maybe their outcomes change, that still doesn't tell me whether we're doing the program correctly. If I just increase the progress monitoring, the progress of the clients, the actual behavior of the clients, doesn't tell me much about the plan. I can assume, but it won't tell me much. Anyway, I like that too. If you can do that, if you say this is the best answer, that's the second best answer, third, fourth, that's great. Which also works for those questions where you're like, first, next, what's the last thing you should do?
All righty. Well, let's all come back at 11:06 Pacific and we'll finish this out.
Okay, start your engines. Here we go.
And we're back.
Yes, we are. And I'm going to jump right in. Which is not a level of understanding in science? I'll just let you read them.
It's way too easy for this group. What were you thinking?
I don't know. What was I thinking? I guess prediction or description, prediction, and control. So that means C is the odd person out. C is the right answer because it's the wrong answer.
And there's a great graphic in Cooper, maybe I'll grab it and try to find it for you, that really explains all of these and how they work in experimental design. And like once I kind of got that stuck in my head, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. So I'll look for that as we're going over these answers and throw in a page number.
All the stuff that makes sense, we should bring that.
Yes.
You bet. Okay,
So
we're gonna move on though.
No, can you go back for a second and talk about
1001 Mississippi.
Can you please talk those through, describe them?
Yes, I can. So let's start with description. That's really just what it sounds like. You're describing behavior, but when you have a descriptive analysis, that's all you're doing is I see this happening and then that happens too. Your ABC analysis, you're recording the rate of the behavior or duration of behavior is describing the behavior. Again, ABCs I love because you're talking not just about the behavior, but you're talking about the things that happen around the behavior before and after. But that's description. Now, prediction sounds easy, but you have to make some hypothesis about the covariation of events. So I'm going to predict that if I put this intervention into place, then this will happen. That's your prediction. You're not just talking about describing the behavior or the antecedents of the behavior or even the tendencies. Like, well, when I put some work in front of this person, they tend to scream and throw it off of their desk. Okay, that's just a description. But the prediction part would be like, I wonder if I give them work, will they scream at me? If I don't give them work, will they not scream at me? Those are predictions. And then we get control by really putting those things into place, testing our predictions or our hypotheses. So that's the control part, is when let's do the ABAB design again. You start with baseline, you put intervention into place and it works. And then you remove that, the behavior reverses, and then you put it back into place. And it does the same thing, it works. You've got control.
So the graphic that I was talking about is in Cooper, the 3rd edition on page 195, and I just love it.
It looks a lot like what we were talking
Yeah.
about with the affirmation of consequence.
But I really like how it is kind of set out and you can see what happens in those.
Mhm.
So check out page 195 in the most recent edition.
Cool. And you maybe ask these things, prediction, or what's an example of, and again, just concentrate on, are they just talking about describing these events, or are they making a hypothesis or a prediction about it? And then finally, have they shown at least 2 replications of these comparative analyses? are we sure that the reason behavior changed is the independent variable? Then that's control.
So everybody's clear that the answer to that one is C. Replication is not one of those levels of understanding.
Yep.
Okay.
We're clear. In order to find out what might actually reinforce requesting behavior for Maya, you might do any of the following except A, ask her parents and teacher if Maya likes bubbles. B, blow bubbles for Maya only when she requests. C, stop blowing bubbles when Maya requests. Or D, observe how many times Maya goes to the bubbles during free play.
This is very interesting. So a lot of you have had to go back and change your answers on this one. And I think it's the negation that's throwing you off.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk it through, Kevin, but every answer has been mentioned.
Right. So again, these are hard for me too. The accept or not or least or whatever. So I'm looking for, and I got to remind myself, and I want you to remind yourself, you're actually looking for what might how could we find these reinforcers?
And can I just point out one little quick thing?
Yeah, of course.
We're talking about a reinforcer versus a preference here. So I always think about, okay, when we ask somebody or, you know, even the client, if we ask them about their preferences, we have to see them acting as a reinforcer for it to be a reinforcer. So I can say that I like chocolate, but I might not actually do the behavior that Kevin wants me to do for chocolate. Mm-hmm. So we want to see the difference between a preference and a reinforcer.
Right. Okay, so we're really just looking for reinforcers and which one might work, or which ones might work, and then finding the one that wouldn't. So ask your parents and teacher if Maya likes bubbles. So we could ask her, it's clearly indirect way to find out whether something is a preference, or like Amy said, we really won't know. It's a putative reinforcer. It's a reinforcer that's possible because they've said it, but we haven't seen it in practice. Anyway, then B, blow bubbles for Maya only when she requests. Okay, so if she requests, we blow bubbles and find out if that's a reinforcer. And because if she continues to request, then I assume, yep, we can do that. So I think that would be a direct observation way to find this out. So I think it's better than A so far. Let's keep going. C, stop blowing bubbles when Maya requests. Okay, so I don't know, you can read this a couple of ways. You can see, do you mean that we're going to stop blowing bubbles? We're currently blowing bubbles, and then when Maya requests us to continue, that we stop? Or is it that she's requesting to stop? I don't know. But either way, it's probably still okay. We're going to learn something. You know, if we were blowing bubbles and she said, oh, keep blowing bubbles, and we stop. She might get annoyed, which would tell us maybe she wants to, or, you know, she would have an extinction burst perhaps, and that would tell us, oh yeah, maybe this is reinforcing. But anyway, you read C, I still think it's a direct observation, and that makes it better than A, and B's still a good answer. So I think A is the standout so far. And D, observe how many times Maya goes to the bubbles during free play. Okay. So that's clearly just a free operant arrangement of the same idea. Does she just approach it on her own? I think that that's going to tell us whether that's a reinforcer. So B, C, and D, and I think you've heard me say it, they're direct. They're direct observations of her behavior under these conditions, so we can learn something about the reinforcement value of bubbles. Whereas A, indirect. So to me, that's worse. Might be better sometimes, but in general, I'd always go with the direct observation or measurements as opposed to indirect ones. So A is the answer because it's the worst. It's the exception. Yes?
Mhm.
Okay. Nobody wants to argue that one.
Somebody's asking why not C?
Yeah, because I'm not sure, again, I'm not sure whether, I know I wrote it, but it isn't clear whether we're stopping blowing bubbles when she requests us to stop. Because if she does, then, that's reinforcing her behavior. Or I think what I meant by this, and again, it doesn't matter what I meant by it, it's like, here it is, so we have to read it. Stop blowing bubbles when she requests for more bubbles, then I might see an extinction burst. Might see her reaction. And if I did, I'd say, oh, well, maybe she actually wants bubbles. So I think that C still gives us some information that's direct rather than just asking her parents. So that's why I think C is still better to do than A.
Somebody's pointing out though that C could act as a punishment, which is not preferred.
Right, it could, but we would know something about the reinforcing value of it. See,
That
so
it's not
even if
reinforcing.
if it isn't reinforcing, we know that now. Whereas the indirect measure doesn't tell us that much. That makes
Okay.
sense?
Mhm.
Okay. All right. It could be said, it will be said, I'm sure, but it could be said that compared to the first phase of the graph, the second phase has high variability, a stable trend, similar levels, or replication.
That's a whole lot of A's coming in real fast.
Too easy, right?
Yeah, don't you hope you get that one on your test?
Yeah, I hope you all get this one, yeah. But it gives us an opportunity, even though it is too easy, and yes, A is the answer, we can talk about variability, trend, and level. So I want you to see that the level is really just at what height, what dV measurement are we in? So it's a range here in the first phase from like 12 to 8. That is the level of these behaviors over here. And the level over here is between 5-ish and 0. So that's the level. And these are at different levels, so they're not similar. Stable trend, well, that looks like a trend to me. And this even, if we try to draw a line in here, I would say this is probably the trend of this data on this side over here. So they have the same or a similar trend, not a stable trend. Stable trend is usually interpreted as like no trend. It's flat, it's the same, same level across. But level there, trend, it's kind of relative. Like this one does look like it's a downward trend, and so does this one. But don't get too much into the graph like this. I mean, you saw that this is higher variability than this, but some people would just look at this first phase over here and say, oh, it's variable because it's not exactly in a line. And like, well, okay, but relative to what? This, I mean, a line is absolutely no variability. And then like a big circular globular pattern is the most variability you can have. But I don't want you to get too caught into looking at this too closely. It should be fairly obvious what the trend is and how variable it is. You don't want to like make it into this is high variability. No, it's not. And this is a little more variable than that. That's all. Anyway, you knew that. Getting this symbol?
That's the pick up the pace symbol.
Here we go. For negative reinforcement to be effective, exposure to stimuli must be all except. ongoing or intermittent, aversive, applied at the greatest magnitude, or removed.
A's, C's, and D's. Kevin, open, there's a B. So you've got some of all of them.
Okay. Well, what I would like you to do is, when you're summarizing the scenario, here's a good example of, well, let's summarize. What is negative reinforcement? Let's remind ourselves. There's something, relatively aversive that you would like to avoid, and you behave, and you are reinforced by its removal. Okay, or whatever words you want to say, but it's something to that effect, right? So we need to have something that is, exposure to stimuli must be aversive, must be, for it to be effective, we need to have the thing be ongoing or intermittent, or the reinforcement. And certainly the exposure to stimuli has to be removed, like upon our behavior. So we need to get that out of there. If it doesn't, then we aren't reinforced for that behavior. We try another behavior, or we try harder, or something like that. So it doesn't need to be applied at the greatest magnitude.
And some of you cued into, that's talking about punishment.
It's talking about punishment.
Yeah.
But if you thought that, or if you were confused by, any of these, you're like, okay, why would C be right? Applied at the greatest magnitude. How do I apply negative reinforcement, or how do I apply stimuli at the highest or greatest magnitude? I don't know. I just turn up the volume of how aversive it is. Perhaps, but that isn't something that you have to do for negative reinforcement. It doesn't have to be something that you absolutely terrified of. It could be something that you just don't like very much, or even just annoys you or whatever. So anyway, I think for it to be effective, ongoing or intermittent makes sense. The stimulus has to be aversive, and as a result of your behavior, it has to be removed. So I think C is the only one that makes the most sense, because it doesn't. That's the exception.
All right, moving on.
Nice that we're getting a smattering there. It makes me happy. To assess, maybe I should skip to the bottom. During this observation, the child has demonstrated all of the verbal operants except, we might get into a good discussion on this one.
Or maybe this one will just be crystal clear.
It might be crystal clear, let's see. But anyway, we know what we're looking for. Now let's read it just once. To assess a preschooler's communication level, you observe them in the classroom. The child says, please, after a teacher models, please, points to your ID badge and says, mine? The child then goes to a carpeted area and sings the chorus of a song along after the teacher sings everything but the chorus. And then we get back to the question. During this observation, the child has demonstrated all the verbal operants except, is it a mand, a tact, an intraverbal, or an echo?
So A's, B's, and D's.
Okay, we're looking for the exception, and we know that. So what you likely did, and I hope you did, was look for what is there. So I see that the child says, please, after teacher models, please. That sounds like an echo. All right, so we've got that one. That's not the exception. They have demonstrated an echo. They point to your ID badge and say, mine? So if they're saying mine, I don't think that's attacked, because attacked would say badge, or is that you, or something along those lines. They would be labeling the thing they see, your ID badge. But instead, it sounds like a question, and it sounds like they want it, right? Mine. So I would say, I am going to say, that sounds like a man. So we've got an echo and a mand. So that leaves B or C. The child then goes to the carpeted area, sings the chorus of a song, after the teacher sings everything but the chorus. So kind of filling in the blank. Sounds like interverbal behavior to me. So the only thing I don't see is tact. I think that's the answer. And I'm sticking to it.
Well, good. It's what we agreed was the answer. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
All right.
Yeah.
So somebody's saying they thought a man had to receive what they were asking for.
Yeah. If I ask you for $1,000, is it not a man if you don't give me $1,000? I mean, again, we can debate these things, but I'm pretty sure what controlled my behavior was that I wanted $1,000 from you. So I think it's still a man. You're right that that's part of the definition, because that's, you know, if we know all of that, we know there's an MO in place, and we know that there's this request, and then it's reinforced with what it is you requested. Absolutely. We're very crystal clear that that's a man. But still, you can ask for things and not receive them. Still a man. Maybe that's just my opinion, but that's how I see it. Okay.
I'm still confused between A and B, because I'm trying to find out. I don't see a man. I don't know why I'm not seeing the man.
Yeah. Okay. So where I'm seeing it is in that word mine. So the child saying please after the teacher models please, then they point to your badge. I'm assuming, you know, you got the badge around your neck, or maybe you're a sheriff. I don't know, whatever, but you've got some badge on you, and they point to it and say mine, you know, with the question mark. So they aren't tacting it. I mean, they aren't saying what it is. It seems like they're asking for it. They're saying, is it mine? Can I have it, or whatever, or interpret it. But that's where I see the demand. Is mine?
Oh, okay, I see it. That they label like mine, like it's mine. Can I get it, or something like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
And somebody pointed out in the chat that attacked would be like you're pointing to it and saying badge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like I just said, like this
Yeah.
the sheriff's thing. If they said star, you'd be
Right.
like, okay, yeah, I see that. That could be attacked.
Okay.
Cool.
Getting there.
You guys are on it. A toddler goes to a play kitchen area and picks up a plastic piece of corn. If teaching mans, what would be the next best step? Would you say corn while pointing to the piece of plastic in the child's hand? Smile when the child repeats corn? B, take the corn and set it down. Point to the corn while saying corn. When the child says corn, give the child a hug. C, begin repeating corn over and over. Stop when the child says corn. D, take the corn, say corn. When the child verbalizes corn, hand the plastic piece back to the child. Whew. Okay, it's a lot to think about.
They're rolling in.
Picture it, see it in action.
Thus far, it's overwhelmingly D.
I knew that they would come up with it.
Yes, they
Yep.
did.
Okay, so did you picture it? And if you didn't have to, fine, but I like to picture it happening, and then you can see, oh yeah, that doesn't do it. That doesn't help me get to where I want to, which is, again, to remind yourself, it's teaching mans. I want to teach mans what would work. Would I say corn, point to it? I'm imagining that there's that piece of corn that's in their hand, and smile when they repeat it. Well, again, if I want to teach mans, because we know mans are controlled by motivating operation. I want them to want the thing, want to say corn to get the corn. And this doesn't seem like that's doing that. It's in their hand, and I smile when they repeat, so I'm reinforcing, but I'm not encouraging them to demand it. And even if they did say corn, that would be, it's in their hand, so it would just be tacking it. They already have it. So A can't be the answer. B, take the corn, set it down, point to the corn while saying corn. When the child says corn, give them a hug. Okay, so again, somebody pointed that out in the last one. Manding really means you're asking for a specific reinforcer. And here, you give them a hug. So if you wanted corn, you gave them a hug. It's a weird response. You know, think about going to a barbecue. Yeah, I'll have another piece of corn. Someone gives you a hug. Okay, that's not quite right. C, begin repeating corn over and over. Stop when the child says corn. I like that one. Like they're tired of you. It's an interesting intervention. Maybe it would work. You could try it with your kids because they probably try it with you. Mom, 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 right? See what you do, but that's not gonna accomplish the goal. So if you've kind of pictured the whole thing, then clearly D has to be the answer. You take the corn, say corn. When the child verbalizes corn, you hand it back to the child. So they say it, they get it. Easy peasy. And
Okay.
we don't know, I don't see an MO necessarily in there. I don't know that they want it, but at least if they say it, I'm going to give it to them.
And that was D. Moving on.
A question,
Yeah.
sorry.
Adha.
So yes, this is me. So from my understanding, man controlled by MO, right?
Mhm.
So he needs to be wanting the thing. My question is, the item should be present or non-present by the time we do the man training?
When you do man training, it would be great to have the item present if it's an item.
Mhm.
When we are through with man training, we want to make sure that it's not just tacked in. So it'd be great if we could remove the item. If we could have the request without the item present. Yes, that would be.
That's why D is more accurate than A.
Yes, and with A, they don't get. They're pointing the piece of plastic child, yeah, and they're just repeating what you say.
Yeah, they need to get the
Yeah.
what they want. Yeah.
So yeah, I have to say it and get it. That's it.
Great. Thank
So
you.
we could take D and improve it too by making sure that it is an MO. Like if this kid, loved playing with this piece of corn, we actually took it from them, and they were like, "Hey, give me that back." And I say, "Well, say corn," and they did. Okay, so that's one way to foster a motivated operation is to deprive somebody, right? So you can just take it. Sounds a little cruel, but you can give it right back. It's fine. Anyway, D is the best answer that's here. So yes.
So one quickie, why are we not in asking mode? What do you want? And have the child say corn.
What do you
No.
want? Okay, so you're prompting, what do you want? And then you're saying, it kind of sounds like an errorless learning procedure that you're talking about. Like I say, what do you want? Corn. And I give it to him. What do you want? Corn.
And there is a
Give it to them.
reinforcer in D that when they say that, they get the plastic piece of corn.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, this is great. You can see lots of ways of doing it.
but I'm sorry, for the sake of time, we really have to move on. So let's go. Let's do it.
Okay. In any time, email us if it wasn't clear, you want to go over something, or we'll even jump on Zoom with you. Okay. All right. So moving on, says my organizer. You drive a couple of old cars. When you exchange an old car for a new car, you pick the silver one over the orange one. Because of the seatbelt alarm in your new car, you wear your seatbelt less in your old car. Your seatbelt behavior is an example of what? Is it the matching law, a concurrent schedule, a mixed schedule, or behavior contrast?
Too
You're like
easy.
shaking your head.
I'm nodding at
nodding,
all of your
shaking.
answers. Yeah.
So I'm like, okay.
I'm getting my
I'm
workout,
recording
shaking my
Amy's
head.
behavior, and I don't understand it.
No, I'm nodding because they all like D, and D is the best answer.
Dang. Okay. I hope that it's that clear for you. You guys, you know, got this one and you picked out the other behavior contrast pretty well too. Is you got to see there's these two schedules and then one of them changes and that means the other one changes in the opposite direction. So like this, one changes, the other changes in the other direction. So that's what you need to see, and there you did. If it was the matching law, again, you'd have to have two interval schedules. It's interval, not ratio. So if you see ratio schedules, the matching law is not likely to apply. That's not going to fit. You know, your prediction is going to be off if you say, oh, matching law says this. So it's not that. Concurrent schedule, okay, sort of. I mean, you can drive one car or the other, so you could choose which car to drive. You have a choice, but this isn't really about the concurrent schedule of which car you want to drive at any given time. This is about behavior contrast. In a mixed schedule, you just wouldn't know what the schedule of reinforcement in place is, and that's not it. So I hope you didn't get confused by that, but again, if you're not sure, just imagine, well, if it was a mixed schedule, there would be a change in, you know, we'd have one schedule in place and then another, but it wouldn't have any SDs to tell me what that change was, or even that there was a change in the schedule of reinforcement. I wouldn't know. And that isn't what's here. So it is D, behavior contrast. Okay. Which is an example of appropriate collaboration with other professionals? A, tell the teacher to complete a functional analysis. B, ask the speech language pathologist to reinforce Mands. C, ask the teacher to make conclusions about the function of behavior. D, tell the occupational therapist that sensory integration training is not scientifically supported.
Almost everyone likes B for this one.
Okay, great. So with all these collaboration questions, the ethical code has changed a little bit to actually kind of just basically say you need to collaborate. It doesn't really tell you what that means. I'm going to tell you that I'm pretty sure the board means always you want to advocate for scientifically based interventions. You want to advocate for your clients, how much service they need, but also ABA, you want to advocate for them. And that's part of the collaboration for when you say, no, I can't do this and that. Let's talk about what you can do, right? So you can, I agree, B, sounds right. Ask the speech language pathologist to reinforce Mands, because they can do that. That's the kind of thing that they work on, and that seems collaborative. They're like asking them to do that. Whereas A and C, you can tell it's asking someone to do something outside of their role. It's more within your wheelhouse as a behavior analyst. And then D, you might have to say something like that, but this one, it doesn't sound like you're advocating for scientific interventions. Instead, you're just saying, no, yours sucks. And that's not quite the same. So B's better, the best. Imagine that you've gathered latency data every day for a month. The opportunities for responding have ranged from 5 to 15 times per day. Assuming that you'd like to display the average latency value for each day, as well as the day of the response, you would most effectively use which? A line graph, bar graph, histogram, or cumulative graph? Mm-hmm. That help?
So very interesting. All have been mentioned. So let's talk them through.
Okay, well, it's a little, there's a two-part thing here. So we've got the behavior 5 to 15 times a day, or that's not the behavior, the opportunities for responding. So you know the behavior is not going to be more than that. But anyway, assuming that you'd like to display two things, that's the thing. Average latency value for each day. So I encourage you to just throw in some numbers that help you kind of cement this in. 10 seconds. Let's say the average latency is 10 seconds every day, as well as the day of the response. Okay, so for a month, you've got 30 days listed, or 20, whatever, school days. And on each one of those, you want to display, and I'm making this up, but I'm just saying 10 is a good example. So if I had 10 every day was my average latency, 10 seconds. All right, what would that look like? With the line graph, you would see if it was 10 seconds every day on average, then each day would be 10, and you'd have this line that's just straight at the value of 10. Okay, that would show you if there's any variation, then you would see that in the line graph. With a bar graph, you'd have 30 different bar graphs, all of different heights. And again, the bias for ABA is, unless you're trying to use a bar graph to show, look at this contrast between, this bar is really big and this bar is really little, there's really not much reason to use it. We use line graphs over that.
Well, and you can always kind of remember too, bar graphs and histograms would be better for summary data in ABA.
Yeah. Right. And a histogram is really just a bar graph that's stacked on top of itself, right? Or smashed together. A cumulative graph, again, you're seeing average latency. So it's a cumulative graph is a frequency graph. So I don't see how you use that. So you might say bar graph, but I think the better choice is line graph. That's what we generally use. Okay.
Yep.
All right, a graduate student has decided to tackle his procrastination once and for all. In order to assess his behavior, he first has random, frequent study reminders sent to him via text message. He spends about 15 minutes setting this up. He then measures the time that it takes from encountering his own response prompt to sitting down and studying. The student is measuring what?
And that last answer was A, if anybody missed it. You guys are coming in fast and furious with this one. Very definitive. Looks like most people really prefer D, Kevin.
Excellent. All right, I'm glad. But let's be sure. Is he measuring A, which would be how many times he sits down and studies? Nope, he's not. Is he is he measuring the sitting down and studying that happens, or the time between sitting down and studying? No, he's not doing that. Is he measuring the frequency divided by a time period? So how many study periods per hour, or study times per hour? Nope, he's not. He is measuring latency. How much time from the prompt to when he starts the behavior. That's it. Okay. That is an important point of latency. Make sure you're not measuring duration. So it should be from that prompt or SD to the beginning of the response. That's when you want to measure latency.
Can you do 5 questions in 15 minutes?
Oh, let's find out. Jesse's parents have hired you at BCBA. Congratulations, by the way, to help them address Jesse's screaming and tantrum behavior. Jessie is 5 years old and non-vocal. The majority of the day, Jessie is with her grandmother, who thinks the parents are creating a monster. She tells you that Jessie's parents never follow through with any plans for Jessie. It's easier for them to just let the behavior continue and that Jessie stops her tantrum when given what she wants. Jessie indicates what she wants by pointing and has a limited signing vocabulary. You should first, A, work only with the grandmother on reinforcing alternative behaviors to decrease tantrums and screaming. B, terminate the contract due to the fact that the behavior will not be reinforced in the post-training environment. C, address the environmental constraints with the parents in order to gauge their willingness to participate in an intervention. Or D, inventory Jessie's current repertoire.
So the majority is for D, but we do have both A and C mentioned. I'm sorry, the majority is for C, but A and D were mentioned.
Oh, okay.
My bad.
Really? Okay.
No.
Got it. All right, great. You guys are just on it. So if we go with A, work only with the grandmother and reinforcing these things, I think most of you probably said, no, that's not right. But let's pretend it was. If that's the right answer, then the scenario needs to say that Jessie's parents aren't really there, that grandmother is the one who is the caregiver and will be reinforcing whatever behavior or intervening with whatever plan we come up with. So if it said that, then A might be right, but it doesn't. And B, terminate the contract. Well, not yet, but it could be the answer. If we're going to terminate the contract because we tried to get the parents involved and or the grandparents, and they just weren't cooperative. And we kept trying to make it easier for them or, whatever. It has to say that we tried to get them involved. But it absolutely is ethical to say, look, I've given you these plans or recording measures or whatever, and we're not getting any compliance. You're not doing it, and it's really not making any sense. So we aren't to that place yet, but I do want you to see you could be there. So if the scenario says something like what I'm saying, then yeah, could be B. C, address the environmental constraints with the parents in order to gauge their willingness. Yes, that's what you should do. You should try to get the parents' involvement. And again, if you come up with a mutually agreed plan, you follow through, but parents don't, just like grandmother said they wouldn't, then you might terminate. I mean, at a point where you decide we've given it everything we can. And no, it's not quite D, inventory Jessie's current repertoire. Sure, it's already given you quite a bit of information. Well, not quite a bit, but it's given you some information about Jessie's skills, but that isn't really the problem. Yes, we want to increase Jessie's skills, but this is more about the tantruming and how we're going to get buy-in, how we're going to get maintenance, or what's the relevance of behavior.
I do love the relevance of
Yes,
behavior
you do.
rule. Yes.
Anyway, so yeah, it's not D. Even though that sounds like a good idea, it doesn't really answer the question. It doesn't go with the theme. Okay, so if you did say D, it's not a bad idea. Yeah, we should know that, but I think it doesn't quite get to the focus of the question.
So to reiterate, the best answer for that one was C.
Yes, thank you. 1, 2, 3, C. No, that's just me, huh? Okay. Prescott slumps to the floor in order to gain attention. Which is the best option to reduce this? A, leave Prescott where he slumps. B, play checkers with Prescott after short walks without slumping and give Prescott extra work when he slumps. C, scold Prescott briefly and give him extra work after he slumps. Or D, have Prescott's preferred activities be in a place where he must travel to and give him extra work if and when he slumps. Do you like that answer?
So the answers that are coming in are primarily B's and D's.
Okay. All right, just looking at all this. A, leave Prescott where he slumps. I kind of want to do that, but it's not really giving him an alternative, is it? So if the scenario said something like, what's the most parsimonious way, quickest way, maybe something like that, I might go, I like A, but I don't like it the best because we get into B. It's like, all right, you're giving him attention by playing checkers, short walks. So he's doing the behavior without slumping. He's walking without slumping. And then you're also adding this extra work if he does do this behavior you don't want him to do. So that seems good. Not only are you trying to punish the behavior if it happens, but you're offering an alternative and providing attention. So it offers too much. B offers way too much for me to say A is better. So B is better than A. Let's look at C, scold him, give him extra work. That's just punishment alone. So B is still better. And D, have Prescott's preferred activities be in a place where he must travel to and give him extra work. Okay, but it doesn't address the attention function. What we have to give him attention for doing something correctly. And so B remains the best answer.
Sweet. So you have 8 minutes for 3 questions.
You have like a lack of faith or something.
I wonder why.
Do I talk too much? Is that what it is? All right, what would be best used to evaluate the effectiveness of a behavior change program? Would you use parent caregiver satisfaction surveys, or weekly supervision of behavior change agents, or comparing intervention data to initial goals, or D, establishing support for reinforcement in the natural environment?
Well, this one's fast and furious C's, Kevin. People like C.
Great. Yeah, you guys are seriously on it. But I also want you to look at these and say, what would that do? What would that be good for? Parent caregiver satisfaction surveys? Sure, it's a measure of social validity. Does everybody seem to think that this worked, or this was a good idea, or it was done well?
But that doesn't necessarily tell you if this program was effective or not.
No, it could have been really ineffective and done nothing.
But the parents are still happy.
But parents are happy. Absolutely. I mean, I've certainly seen that. Parents are happy or parents are unhappy, but you know, the program hasn't changed or the behavior hasn't changed. B, weekly supervision. What would this be good for? Well, you should be saying, well, if I supervise these people, then they're going to be better at doing it. So the plan fidelity is going to be there, but the effectiveness of a plan indirectly. So even if they're doing the plan correctly, maybe the plan sucks. So anyway, it's going to make the plan better or implemented more accurately, but not necessarily the effectiveness. Then, like you said, I mean, all of you sounded like said C is the answer, comparing intervention data to initial goals. So here's what we wanted to have happen. Did it happen? Yep. Okay, seems like it was effective. Met our goals or not. And then establishing reinforcement in the natural environment, that's about maintenance. That's about generalizing that behavior. Okay, so you're right, it's C, but imagine what those other ones would do or why you would use them. Okay, which is not likely an example of a motivating operation. A, after running a marathon, you really want a glass of water. B, you have been waiting in line at the DMV for an hour and a seat becomes available. C, when you step out of the shower, you look for your towel. D, your pants look very unflattering in the full-length mirror.
I'm rolling my eyes at this one.
Why? Do my pants look unflattering? Is that what you're saying?
So almost the majority is liking D for this one, Kevin, but we do have B mentioned. So
Okay,
we'll give that a moment.
we'll talk about it.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think you can talk about it.
All right, A, after running a marathon, you're clearly deprived of, or you're thirsty most likely. So it's sort of just, again, it's a bit of an assumption, but I think you're saying there is an MO there for a glass of water. So that is likely an example. You've been waiting in line at the DMV for an hour. So that's supposed to tell you, you have been in a line and you don't want to be in a line anymore. You're satiated with this line crap and a seat becomes available. Yeah, you probably want the seat more than you did after standing there for an hour. So that's why I think that is an example of motivating operations. It just says waiting in line. I know it doesn't say standing, but this whole first part of the sentence is about telling you, see, there is a motivation here. There is a reason why you want this thing more than you would have when you first came in, right? When you step out of the shower, you look for your towel. Step out of the shower, you're wet. We assume, I guess, that we're wet and you want to be dry. So there you go, towel's there. This one, the D, you're right. It doesn't look like an MO, or it's the least best example. Your pants look very unflattering. Now, again, should I say Elizabeth? Anyway, you overthinkers out there might go, oh, well, if I look at my pants and I don't like the way they look, then I'm motivated to, eat right and exercise or get new pants or whatever. Okay, but I think you're stretching, what's going on here. So A, B, and D are good examples. D's not. So D is the answer.
Icky. D is an icky answer. All right, last one.
Which is an example of an MO. Okay, so is an example of an MO. A, you see a traffic jam up ahead of you. B, you're waiting a traffic light or at a traffic light and the walk sign illuminates. C, you pull on the parking brake and a dashboard light shows up that reads park in red. D, you are ready to buy some pants. Here we go with the pants again. And an employee is behind the counter. Where are we?
For the most part, we're seeing A's and D's, Kevin. Explain away.
Okay. So what we're looking for is a stimulus, right? Everything's a stimulus, but there's a stimulus that now signals, I'm thinking of a CMO, but you're saying that I now, because of this, I want something more or less than I did just a moment ago. Just a second ago, I didn't want it as much, or I want it more than I did. So A, you see a traffic jam up ahead of you. That's an indication that you're going to go slow. You probably want to go faster, continue going faster now. So that makes sense to me. This is one of those stimuli where it looks like things are about to get worse, and you might get off the freeway or check Google Maps or Waze to see if there's a way around it, etc. So it does sound like an MO. B, you're waiting at a traffic light and the walk sign illuminates. That's more of an SD, right? So, okay, there's a signal that you can do the behavior now. The fact that you're waiting there might sound a little like an MO. I don't think quite as much as A, but you're waiting and the walk sign tells you when you can go. It signals that there's availability of reinforcement now, not that you wanted to walk anymore just because the walk sign illuminates. So I like to say it like that. Like if you could talk about the wanting increasing or decreasing, that usually helps. You didn't want to walk more or less because the sign went on. You pull on the parking brake and dashboard light shows up that reads park. Okay, so the fact that that comes up signals you that, okay, it's in park, but it doesn't really make you want anything more or less. Or it's not very clear what that might be. So I don't think it's C. And D, you are ready to buy some pants and an employee is behind the counter. So I think for D and B, the first part of it starts to sound like an MO, but then the second part makes it like, probably not. So the employee behind the counter is the SD that, yes, you can buy some pants. So you want to buy some pants, that's the MO. But the fact that there's somebody there didn't make you want to buy them more or less. You're just ready to buy them and there is somebody, that's an SD. So we're back to A being the right answer, that you see a traffic jam up ahead of you. It's a stimulus, it's a signal, it's a whatever that says, oh, things are going to get worse. I don't want to get stuck in a traffic jam. That's a CMOR.
So that was our last question. I know a couple of you still have some follow-up questions. We're going to go back to slide 400 and 433 for a few of you. But if you don't have any questions, you should go enjoy your Saturday.
Be free.
Get something to eat. Have some fun.
Yeah, don't just clean the house.
Yeah. Kevin, could you please return to slide 400?
I don't know what that is.
Well, just you have to look at the numbers.
Okay. They are showing up. Okay, I got it.
Bye, the rest of you, though.
Well, yeah, come back again, or email us. Okay, what's the question?
I just think you need to explain that one again.
Okay, so if we just summarize the whole thing, it's you were doing all kinds of things, and that's pretty clear from the scenario. So get that. There's a lot of stuff you're doing, and now things are your hours, your funded hours are cut in 1/4, not just 1/2, but a half of a half. So you don't have much time. And that's what I want you to get out of this. Okay, you don't have much time. So do I terminate service? No. Do I terminate service? No. Do I continue to provide the same stuff, but just, shorten it? And I don't see how you do that, but I mean, C is the only answer I would consider other than D. So if you're caught between those, just go, okay, can I just keep doing the same thing, but swoosh it into, 15 minutes instead of an hour? Can I do that? Or do I transfer service to parent training and support rather than direct service? So there, the service time that I am using, is 1/4 what it was. Now maybe the parent can do more of the intervention rather than me. That makes the most sense, or it seems like it answers the question. Like C doesn't, pretend C is the answer. Continue to provide direct service for the hours that you do have. Now I go back to the scenario and say, how does this answer help this? And I don't see it. I go, well, just keep doing the same thing, but less. That's my solution. It's not really working for me. So if it works for you, that I'm not sure where else to go with that, but I think D is a better answer here.
Now, can you please go to 433?
Well, I can try. Except I don't know whether it's 410. What did you say, 433?
433.
Okay, got it.
And there was just another question about this one. If you're still on, feel free to ask the question that you had. I just knew that we needed to review this one.
Okay.
So go for it.
I had a question about this one. I wanted to know why it seems like the work is a punishment, but the function of the behavior is attention. So I couldn't connect that.
Okay, so why?
Why would you give work to a child as a punishment when the function of the behavior is not related to escape?
Yeah, no, yeah, that's a good thought. Yeah, I don't know why you would do that. You get them extra work.
I think that's what made me think that was wrong. Like A sounded super basic, but I thought, okay, remove the attention, right? But everything else seemed wrong because you were giving work for the wrong function.
Yeah, okay.
I agree.
I think that's a good point. I don't think that it changes my answer. I don't think so, but I mean, again, I go back to maybe A would be a better answer, or the next best answer. So with that, I still think that playing checkers with him is addressing the attention function, and I guess we have to assume that giving him work is punishment. The punishment doesn't have to fit the function necessarily if we've got the DRA is fitting. So do this new thing and you'll get attention. But if you don't, if you do the old thing, then I'm just going to give you something you don't like. I'm going to try to reduce that behavior. So I don't think that the punishment necessarily has to fit. I mean, it's great if it does, but I don't think that it has to, especially when we have a DRA.
So in a sense, that part is like a distractor. So it's more of the first part versus the other. Which one's better? Yeah. Okay.
So.
Thanks.
So. Awesome. Yeah, you bet. So I hope that all helps.
Yeah.
For those of you who are left, if you have other questions, feel free to reach out. I'm gonna go take a nap. So I hope you enjoy your Saturday.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, guys. Bye.
Well, thank you so much for hanging out with us for 4 hours. Wow, I hope you got a lot out of that. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot us an email. You can reach out to us at info@behavioranalystsupervisor.com, or you can throw your comments in the chat. We hope this was a helpful resource, and like I said, stay tuned. Smash that subscribe button and smash that like button if you want more content like this. We will be dropping a super special surprise in the coming future. You're not going to want to miss it, I promise. It's going to be one of the best free resources that we have released to date. You can also check out our Instagram page, Behavior Analyst Supervisor on Instagram. We post a free question every single day, so feel free, go ahead, jump on, try your hand at it. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you the best of luck in your study endeavors.